Okay, Desiree, are we ready?
Your recording is started, Mr. Chair, and I'm still admitting the occasional person into the meeting, but yes.
Great. Yeah, I think we'll probably have quite a few folks streaming into the meeting. But I'm going to get us started because we are on a tight time schedule for this meeting. So this, I want to call this work session to order on business during the time of COVID-19 roundtable. Let's go ahead and start a roll call, please.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, could you repeat that?
Yeah, if we could do a roll call, please.
Yes, 1 second. Okay. Miss Allard?
Here.
Mr. Constant? Mr. Dunbar?
Here.
Miss Kennedy?
Here.
Miss LaFrance? Mr. Presbydia? Mr. Peterson?
Present.
Miss Quinn Davidson?
Here.
Mr. Rivera?
Present.
Mr. Weddleton? Miss Valatel?
Here.
Okay. Let me try Mr. Constant. Miss LaFrance, are you there? I see her in our attendee list. Mr. Presbydia?
Desiree?
Oh.
This is Ms. LaFrance. I'm here.
Hello.
Hello.
And then I've got a couple more people. 1 second, I'm still admitting people into the meeting. Mr. Presbydia, are you there? Mr. Constant.
Yes, Mr. Constant just arrived, and I'm hearing a lot of background noise, so if we can just make sure that everyone is on mute, please, and then when I call you to speak, please unmute yourself. Thanks, everyone.
Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, so today begins the first of 4 different roundtables the Assembly will be hosting over the next week to continue to inform our COVID-19 response. It is important that we hear directly from our community and our partner organizations so we can make the best decisions possible regarding the federal stimulus heading our way. It is apropos that the first in the series is our business roundtable. I look forward to hearing the stories that I look forward to hearing the stories that have shaped the last 2 months in our community and hearing about the ideas that will propel us into the future. I want to thank everyone who was able to make it to today's meeting, and I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule. Before I go into the agenda, I want to state the obvious. We could probably spend all day on this topic and hold a separate 3-hour meeting on each. This is certainly not meant to be the end of our exploration, but a place for us to start collectively as an assembly before we begin exploring and fashioning our own ideas. With that, I'm going to go ahead and go through the agenda for today's business roundtable. So first, once I am done, we're going to spend about an hour listening to a variety of different businesses who are on the line. And after that, we are going to spend about 20 minutes or so doing discussion and questions from Assembly members from those businesses. So it's going to be one business after another. We're not going to really stop for questions in between. We'll do that at the end of hearing from those businesses. Then we're going to spend roughly about 20 minutes hearing from some of our lending institutions. So Wells Fargo initially was going to attend, but unfortunately they could not. So we have a document and that we're going to present that we received from them. From Alaska USA, we have Robert McNaughton, the Executive Director of the Business and Commercial Services. And from Northern Bank, we have Mike Huston, the EDP and Chief Lending Officer. Then we're going to do a general economic overview, roughly about 30 minutes. We're going to be hearing from Bill Popp, again, the president and CEO of the Anchorage Economic Development Corporation, as well as John Bittner, the executive director of the Alaska Small Business Development Center. Then we will hear for about 20 minutes from our Budget Advisory Commission. So both the chair and the vice chair should be joining us, Nolan Clauda and Alyssa Rodriguez. Then we will spend a short amount of time, about 10 minutes, getting an update on the Small Business Nonprofit Relief Grant. So for that, we have Chris Schutte, the Director of Office of Economic Development, and the Jason Buckenstad, the Chief of Staff to the Mayor, as well as some folks who are directly implementing this. So Jeff Tickle with Cook Inlet Lending Center, as well as Gabe Lehman with the Chief Operating Officer of Cook Inlet Housing Authority. And that will then we'll end with any wrap-up comments or additional discussion or questions. So with that, I am going to go ahead and walk through all of the businesses that we have with us, and then we'll get started. So we have, if this list is correct, about 10 businesses with us, I think 11 actually. So we have Doran Powell with Chilkoot Charlie's, Dawit O'Michael with Queen of Sheba, Jasmine Smith with the Business Boutique, Baby Vend and the Business Boutique Support Center, Lina Mariscal with French Oven, Andrea Antoine with Be Bad Productions, Carrie Maestrom with Poppy Salon, Anna, and I apologize, Anna, I'm going to butcher your last name, Kokorova and Paul Van Alstine with Studio One, Michelle Haynes with Picture This, Sharita Napper with Alaskan Fashionistas, and Cindy, and apologies, I don't have your last name, Cindy, with The Bookshelf. And actually, Miss Kennedy is going to be reading some comments that she received, hopefully from Cindy. And then last, we have Eric Helmbricht with Powder Hound. So to kick us off, we're going to start with Doran Powell with Chilkoot Charlie's. And in essence, what we're hearing from each of these businesses is two things. So first, if they applied for PPP or IEDL and just want to get a general sense of that process for them, as well as just sharing the impacts to your business due to COVID-19, and especially will be informative to help us as we develop our responses on top of what has already been approved with the Small Business Relief Fund. Okay, so I'll go ahead and turn it over to Doran Powell with Chilkoot Charlie's.
Good morning. Hi. Yeah, we did qualify for the first emergency grant, the disaster grant for $10,000. That took about 10 days to get through. The PPP was, we did that through Northern Bank, and the banker, the system collapsed, and he managed to get us through electronically by entering the information manually. And we didn't get funded in the first round, but we did get funded in the second round. And if it wasn't for that funding, we probably wouldn't have been able to reopen on a full-time basis. It would have been a real struggle. I can say that suspending the insurance premium, the non-cancellation that the governor did, was a lifesaver, and suspending cancellation of the utilities as we worked through this has been a real help too. There is another loan program that we were just notified of a couple days ago, and it's a larger loan with a 30-year repayment program that we'll be taking advantage of, and that'll help us get reopened. It was a pretty frustrating process for our banker, I know, but for us it was pretty painless. They weren't requiring a whole ton of documentation. I've heard other businesses have been struggling to get that funding, but I can say it's the first time the feds have ever done anything for me. Overall, the closure has been brutal, as you can imagine. We've got about 30% of our employees back to work, and we'll be struggling to we'll probably get back to about 50%, but I don't know if we'll be able to get back to 80 or even 100% in the short term.
Okay, thank you so much. And I think we all know where Coots is, but for the remainder of the business, if you could also introduce your physical location, I think that's something that the body will be interested in. So next, we will turn to Dawit O'Michael with Queen of Sheba. And I'm not sure if Mr. O'Michael, if you're on a phone, but if you are, I believe it is *6 to unmute yourself.
Good morning. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. Yes. My name is DeWitt, and we did apply for federal disaster relief, and we haven't got any response yet. And our address is 2813 Dawson Street. We are well known by vegan restaurant, and the only reason we're here now is that we got help from our landlord. They gave us a break for 2 months, which is starting this month, which is May. Before that, we were planning to close the restaurant because we won't be able to catch up with anything. And the reason is, why do we have to go with federal relief when we can get it from local here, which is local would be such as electric, gas, telephone. If we can get any of those relief from our local here, I can, understand it will help us a lot, because the billing is expensive. If we're not operating the business, how can we pay for those bills? When there's no customer to purchase our product, how can we pay for those bills? So it adds up. When it adds up, it's huge. If it wasn't for our landlord, we wouldn't be here. And the reason is that we told her we're going to be closing, which is a few restaurants around us, they close, and we told her if we don't get any help from her. And the saddest thing is that she lost her husband a month ago. We weren't trying to tell her that we need help from her because she's already grieving from family loss. So my point is that if we go local such as, why do we wait for federal relief when you don't get them? And we haven't got any of them. We receive a letter that says that your application is being processed and order has been received, and we haven't got anything. So right now is it's up to you, and I'm not sure who else except the public of people of Anchorage.
Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right. And just as a reminder to the members, if you have any questions, just queue those up. And after we hear from all the businesses, we'll go through questions. So next we have Jasmine Smith with the Business Boutique, Baby Vend, and the Business Boutique Support Center.
Good morning, everybody. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So my address is 4119 Mountain View Drive, where I operate my businesses out of headquarter-wise. So first and foremost, we did apply for federal funding. The EIDL funding, we finally got a letter back that said we were denied due to lack of credit, but we've been in business for 9 years, so I didn't really understand what that meant. We also applied for PPP through Wells Fargo. The first time we couldn't even get an application in. They just kept telling us to wait to apply because I guess the funding went so fast. And I will say that I didn't notice too many complications in the actual process to apply with Wells Fargo. It was a pretty simple application the second time around. Our issue was more so we just didn't really qualify because, you know, my businesses are more heavy on subcontractors and independent, you know, contractors and 1099s, whereas it was very heavy on W-2s. So we weren't able to get any of that funding. And then we finally put in for that pandemic unemployment, and it's just pending. So it's been very, very difficult. I'd say each business has a little bit of a different personality. The business boutique, you know, I've tried to survive online with that business, but, you know, for the co-working space, we can't co-work. So we're just paying for a building. And like the previous speaker, I've had a great landlord who's worked with us to the best of her abilities, but me understanding that she's also an entrepreneur, it makes me feel kind of bad that we have to have flexibility with our payments and it's impacting her as well. So if it weren't for her being so flexible and just kind of working with us and understanding that we're just not really allowed to operate to that level, it's been very helpful. I think the other complication for us has been just the people itself and trying to ease those worries and those fears that, you know, now that we can open a little bit, it doesn't matter how much we clean. It doesn't matter if we tell them we clean every 30 minutes. I mean, there's always that fear of like sanitation and spreading. And then there's that conversation of supplies, what to wear, what not to wear. So it's been a really big struggle. And, you know, I've just been trying to be as creative as possible and find other means to do business. But, yeah, I'm not really sure what that's going to look like. This is forcing me to have to change the way I operate and kind of get creative with delivery. So, yeah, I don't have the exact answer. I can just say there was no funding and we didn't qualify for the funding. And thank goodness we had a flexible landlord. Otherwise, that's our biggest bill. I'm not quite sure where we'd be. I think in closing, in terms of Baby Van, that one's in the airport, and that was really hard for a while because literally nobody was in the airport, and the things that we sold were like, you know, mask and glove type of things, and they were still charging us rent. So now that they've kind of gave us a break, that's helpful as well. But it's been pretty rough. So I think I'll just kind of leave my comments there for now.
Great. Thank you so much, Jasmine. Next, we have Lina Mariscal with French Oven.
Yes, hello everyone. I am on 31st on Spenard, 1406 West 31st Avenue. I own a building that I share with Blue Market. They just moved in probably 5 months ago. I have 9 employees, and I also have about 80 customers, restaurants that I provide bread for on a daily basis. I did apply for the PPP. I received it after having to hound my banker. I think a lot of it was because the program was really not defined by the federal government and everyone was waiting on directions. However, I had started applying for a loan, just a regular loan, because I wasn't going to be able to make my mortgage payment and keep up with the rest of my bills because most of my customers pay 30 to 45 days out. So I approached 3 different banks for the regular loan that I thought I was going to need, which was Northrim, Wells Fargo, and First National. And First National is actually the bank that holds my mortgage. Because I have an SBA loan as part of the mortgage, so I also contacted them, and for them, they we're not going to request that I make payments for 6 months, which was a lifesaver for that portion of the mortgage, which is 30% of my total payment. For the part of the mortgage that First National carries for me, I'm only paying interest for 6 months. That was deferred. And once I received the PPP loan, I was able to pay most of the bills that I wasn't able to because I didn't have any cash flow. I laid off 3 of my employees and closed for 3 out of the 6 days that we work. I am working long hours and keeping up with some of the different ways of every restaurant trying to survive. So sometimes we have all kinds of different requests that we are trying to accommodate. And for my tenants, I was able to let them make small payments on their lease because being that they're a new business, they didn't have the history for some of the federal relief funds. And we're just trying to make it work.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Lena. So next we have Andrea Antoine with Be Bad Productions. And Andrea, I'm not sure if you are on a phone, but if you are, it's *6 to unmute yourself. Okay, so we'll go ahead and come back to Andrea. Next, we have Carrie Maestrom with Poppy Salon.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello? You can hear me? Okay. Well, thank you for having me today. I applied for the EIDL on April 2nd, which was, I think, less than a week before we closed down. I have 8 employees and 2 booth renters, and I got an email on April 14th telling me that they received my application, but that was it. Before that, I didn't realize that this was going to be as long as it was. And so in order to make some extra money, since we were totally shut down, we started doing deliveries for hair color or color kits. And then we also went online and really promoted our gift cards. And in doing so, when we shut down, I had at least enough money to pay for my rent and for the employees of the month of March. But after that, I still had all of my utilities and all that stuff. So I had to think of other ways to try and make money during that time. And I was really blessed by a lot of the clients. It took a lot of organization, delivering, but we were able to make enough money to cover some of the utilities during that time. And that was, really a blessing. And then on May 1st, my rent was due again, and I ended up having to pay out of my own personal stuff because we didn't have any money at that point in time. May 2nd, I received another email from the SBA saying that my application was still being processed in the order that it was received. The one thing that I've noticed about it is that there's not really a rhyme or reason. When I talk to people if they've gotten theirs or not, a lot of people say, I got 2 emails and then I got the money in my bank account, or I just got it in my bank account, or I got approval and it was there the next day. There's no way of knowing. So I keep holding on hope that it's still there. I know that there are people that applied after me that have received it. So I really, that is discouraging to me. And then I'll talk to somebody and they'll just say, oh, it just appeared. And so at this point, I'm still hoping, to receive it, but I have not received it. So the other things that have happened too is when they told us that we were allowed to open, I think more than a lot of businesses, we have a lot of PPE or they required a lot of PPE because of our close proximity with our clients. So they told us that we could open our salon. I think it was April 27th was Dunleavy, or Berkowitz did say April 27th. I think that was a Monday. But in order to get all of our PPE, I needed a good week and a half to try and, we had to wear new aprons for each client, which is, I don't have 20 aprons, and so I had to order that online. When they first told us we had to use surgical masks, I went online and got them locally, $11 a box. And I only got 1 box because that was what they were allowing us at the time. And then like 6 days later, I went to go get another box and it was $60 for 50 surgical masks. So the price point there, of course, has skyrocketed. And I reached out to local people, and I luckily had a local dentist that I knew that was able to donate like 300 masks to the salon, which I thought was really, really a blessing. We, had to buy cleaning supplies, gloves, do a mitigation plan. I think one of the hardest parts about it is that even if your client is in your chair and they're relaxed about it, the client next to you may not be. We do feel like we are being watched all the time, and I understand that. So our cleaning protocol is just astronomical at this point in time. It's just a lot, but it's worth it that we are able to be open. So then when we did finally open, we were lucky because I forgot to mention I'm at 137 East 7th Avenue. So we are a house downtown. And we are very compartmentalized. I have different rooms. We've all been able to spread out where we are either 10 feet apart or we're in different rooms. And so I have been lucky in that aspect that when we opened, we could open full force. We didn't have to do it slowly. It looks different, but it's there, and we've started making money, and that is happy. I mean, everybody's happy with that. I think at this point in time, I'm just waiting for the SBA, and I hope it comes. If it doesn't, I'm under the impression that you can't apply for both the local grant as well as the SBA. I could be wrong on that factor, because if I don't get the federal one, then I'm just out all that money that I lost last month. So I wonder what the issue is with that. And I think that's about it. I think that's all I have to add.
Great, thank you so much. Next, we have Anna and Paul with Studio One.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for having us here. We are in Midtown at 4007 Old Seward Highway. And Paul is here too.
Hi. Hey, thanks for having us. Hey, so we, in terms of the PPP loan, we did apply for the PPP loan. We missed the first round, which turned out to be fortunate, and we ended up in the second round. We went to Northrim Bank for that, and their service was amazing. We had of course, the application is pretty easy. And again, I thought they did a great job of it. The issues with it are interesting. Is that it's 8 weeks, and I think somebody had talked before about getting employees back and everything. The 8-week window, it doesn't really give you enough time to gear up, especially when we don't have notice. None of us could have had notice about reopening times. So had I been in the first round of PPP, I wouldn't have been able to use the money. I may be able to use some of it. I really worry about a lot of small businesses potentially using it wrong and ending up with a lot of a loan. When I look at the forgiveness amounts and that first round of forgiveness, and so some of the thing with the PPP has been the uncertainty of actually knowing the terms of payout and how to use that stuff is, we're being informed every day, which for a small business person is tricky right now because we're navigating a lot of, as everybody here is navigating so many uncertainties.
Yeah, and we ended up laying off 17 employees.
Yeah, and it's been difficult in terms for their schedule to know when to come back. And our main thing at first was, of course, survivability of the business. You have to have, and we were sure that there was aid coming down the path. And so we sat down with each person and calculated, here's what your unemployment will be, because we were shut down completely. And we knew that there would be some kind of a program coming, and the one from the federal government has worked really well for people. But it's going to be interesting to see what the calculations are there and how much of it we can actually use, because our employees takes us about a year to train and bring them up to speed. So I can't just, it worked great if you had like an assembly line or something like that, where there's a shorter training period. So we'll see how the forgiveness works on that. In terms of the impact on the business, it's been difficult, of course, for all the employees, and it's been difficult for everybody in Anchorage. Just a 5-hour closing period was interesting, I'm sure, for everybody. But luckily we'd prepared really well, and we had been watching it for a while, so we had prepared a package for our clients who stayed, and we prepared online stuff as well. So we were pretty fortunate there. Our clients have been great. Our employees have been great. We're definitely substantially down on our membership revenue. The landlord has been flexible. The short notice to reopen, again, this is such uncertain times for everybody. So that's been difficult to navigate. I think Carrie was talking about the difficulty of getting equipment and supplies to keep people safe and keep your staff safe. I do have some concern about liability on reopening. It'd be great if there was a federal thing to say, hey, if somebody gets COVID in your business, employee or staff, I've read about the possibility of liability from that happening. If you had a super carrier into your studio and multiple people got sick and they were able to trace it back. So it'd be nice if there was some federal or local liability relief there. Employees, definitely some concern, and clients concerned about safety, which is great. And then I think finally the third thing that nobody's mentioned for my aspect is, for a lot of us small business people, is the possibility of a second shutdown or a second wave of Corona. Aid for that possibility would be really, really good, because, at my age, I'm 57 right now. I don't want a huge loan to keep a business going. So it would be nice if we had some things in line for if there is a second wave, what can happen as well. So that's kind of where we stand on it.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you both so much. Next, we have Michelle Haynes with Picture This. Hi, Michelle. You're breaking up a little bit, and you're a little bit soft. I can't hear you very well.
All right. Let me get closer.
There we go. That's better.
Okay. So we qualified for the PPP. I got it actually really quickly through First National Bank. They worked with me and helped me get the numbers all correct so that it would actually get approval. So their customer service was excellent. And then we also got the EIDL. And it wasn't until we just checked the bank account, suddenly it just appeared. We got no notice that it was coming in or that we qualify for anything. So that was interesting. And so when I was talking with my account payable person here. She said, yeah, it just appeared in the bank account. We actually had somebody from the SBA in the store at the time. And so we were commenting about that. She said, yep, that's just what happens. It just appears, and you don't get any warning when you're going to get it. So that was interesting. But it'll be, I think with so many of everyone else, the qualifications for that forgiveness, just that paperwork is probably about 9 pages of information that now I have to fill out and try and figure out how all of that's going to work. So, so we had to change our business model quite a bit. We found out actually when we that's my vacation down.
Oh, sorry,
And-
Michelle, you were broke up for that last like 3 or 4 seconds.
Okay. So when we were told initially, when the mayor said it, we'd be hunkered down until the 31st, it felt like just kind of a forced vacation, and then it wasn't until a few days later, and then suddenly we're going to be closed for longer, and we had to switch gears very quickly into trying to get online and through social media, Facebook, in order to make any kind of sales, because it was one of those feelings that I'm not going down without a fight. And it's been challenging because I'm now working 6 days a week and limited hours in order to get everything done, because it's just me at the store and I don't have staff back yet. A lot of that is because of the stipulations of how you have to track everything, and I don't want to have to involve myself into my staff's lives that way, taking their temperature every day and recording that information, and then applying the HIPAA rules and all of that kind of thing. So I don't have staff yet back in the store yet. I'm looking forward to that happening, but it'll probably not be until next week. And primarily one of the biggest concerns I have is not the initial $0 days, but it's the future of a consistent 25% decrease that will destroy small businesses. I don't know how we go forward in that when the economy opens up a little bit more, how we get that business back. That's my biggest concern going forward.
Okay. Thank you so much, Michelle, for sharing. Next, we have Sharita Napper with Alaskan Fashionistas.
Hi, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Before I start, I would like to share that my business serves and supports Alaskan boutiques and businesses. And how I do that, we haven't been able to officially launch because I wanted to launch around the time that coronavirus hit. And my business would be sending stylists to the local boutiques to ship out a box of clothes to a customer that they can try on and either purchase or send back. My concern with launching with coronavirus is that the clothes, if somebody tries them on and sends them back, I didn't know if that would put anybody at risk. And so I've been still working with supporting my the Alaskan boutiques however I can. And it really, their success has been very hit or miss because of coronavirus and everybody having to really shut down. So I personally am at my home in Wasilla. However, a lot of the boutiques that I serve are in Anchorage. Some are also in the Valley. One boutique in particular is at risk of closing down indefinitely because of the impact of COVID-19 and the restrictions. That boutique in particular really relied on on customers coming to their boutique and having that in-person experience. They weren't really set up online to really ship things to the customers and give that online experience. And they're definitely at risk of closing down indefinitely. And this didn't help the fact that they're located downtown and things have been changing downtown with Nordstrom's closing down and a lot of other retail locations closing down just because more things have been trending online rather than in person. And once COVID-19 hit, that definitely did not help their transition to getting back on their feet. Other clients that I've been working with, other boutiques that I've been working with have really been thriving because they were already set up online. And they had already, invested the time and invested the money to get their online websites up to speed and their shipping down. And it really, I'm sorry, can you still hear me?
Yes.
Hello. Okay, sorry. And so some of the businesses have been flourishing. There was a bit of a dip, about an 8 to 10% dip in retail sales in March for one of the businesses, but they have been heavily relying on a Facebook group to share what new products they have and engaging their customers online however they can through Facebook, Instagram, and online ads. Another retail location did shut down and moved everything online, just in response to not being able to pay their rent because there were nobody was allowed in the store. And so they had to make that transition. And so some of the boutiques did apply for the loan, and one in particular has not heard anything back. And another one did not want to apply for the loan just because they did not want their business to survive off of a loan. If they were already struggling to pay their bills, they were worried about also having to pay the loan. And so we were wondering about grants, will there be any grants coming from this next, going forward, will there be any grants rather than loans available for small businesses? And just how we can support more businesses getting online, where even if there are grants to help people with hiring individuals to help with their websites and getting them online and, helping that process, because I feel like this, COVID-19 really, if you can go online, that's definitely what has been the trend and with keeping some doors open, but other locations are definitely doing the best that they can to keep their doors open.
Great. Thank you so much, Sharita.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Next, we have Cindy with the bookshelf. And actually, I believe Ms. Kennedy is going to be reading those comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, this is some comments from Cindy Montgomery, who owns the bookshelf. It's a used bookstore on the main Dragon Eagle River, the Old Glen Highway. And her comments are, at first I was failing, along with most other small businesses. I looked into the loans and grants and nothing sounded like it was going to work for me. I took to social media, basically said, help. The people in our community stepped up to the plate and kept me afloat. I was able to make rent and pay the bills. I am so grateful for the people in this town. And I will just further comment that she really is, a sole proprietor. This is basically kind of a family-run business. I don't believe she has any employees at all, and just occasionally has family help her with things. And she's, for the most part, the only one in her business on a regular basis. But one of the things that she did say is she also had to adapt quite a bit in terms of how she was running her business. It was kind of interesting. She said when she started mailing things out, she was actually mailing a lot of things to the lower 48. So the people that picked up on her message on social media were all over in different states in the lower 48. But that's really what saved her. It wasn't any kind of loan she was able to get. It was just trying to get the attention of her community and regular supporters, and they're the ones that came through for her. So I will leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy, and thank you to Cindy for providing those comments. Next, we have Eric Helmbricht with Powderhound.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
All right. Well, thanks for having me. We are a ski and bike shop in the base area of Alyeska Resort, right across the street, kind of from Jack Spratt as you drive up to the resort there. We had thankfully a pretty good winter down here, which led us to not be too in trouble when everything hit towards the end of March. and was able to keep as many employees on as we normally would for a while. We definitely had a couple seasonal employees that would normally have been laid off a couple weeks later, just end of season as they get their summer work. They decided to leave work early, and that was fine, but we were giving them the option of hours if they wanted to. We always have end of season work of changeover and building bikes up for summer, and we were still doing plenty of tuning and whatnot. So initially our sales dropped quite a bit. Of course, it just kind of came to a halt, and we didn't know what to do as far as staying open or not. Thankfully, we were deemed an essential business since we're a bicycle shop, which really saved our butts. So we were able to keep employees paid and keeping them hours. So we kept what was going to transfer into our full-time summer staff, minus a few people that don't usually get hired until May, which we're bringing on here in the next week. So we did apply for the PPP and missed it on the first round. I applied the first morning available and kind of got the runaround from Wells Fargo. I then reached out to Northrim, and Carmen at Northrim was super helpful. And on the second round, I had to fill it out again, but we ended up getting the PPP in the account on May 5th, which is great. We don't bank with Northrim, but I think we might be moving some of our business banking over to them. So, so that was, what's that?
It's a lot of work. I have to pick apart 2 speeches.
Sorry, if we can make sure other folks are on mute, please. Thanks.
Oh, sorry. Thought someone was talking to me. So just a quick way of how we kind of kept afloat in those really slow weeks. We did close our doors for about a week as soon as the first coronavirus case in Girdwood was announced. We felt, okay, people don't need us to be open. People enjoy us being open, but we're maybe being a little irresponsible to be open. We were then still doing like curbside if people needed to, and still had employees that felt comfortable being at work still working. And so Girdwood was kind of a bubble, as everybody knows. And I think in general, people would come in and feel, when we opened back up, they would feel kind of a comfort, because we didn't have the signage all over the place and said, don't come 6 feet within another person, don't do this, don't do that. It was just kind of like, let's try to make things feel normal, even though everyone knows they're not. And if they want to wear a mask, be our guest. We'll offer them at the door to them. It's just one of those things where they felt, we saw most people that, they kind of were like, oh, it's so nice to be in an establishment where I'm not forced to do something. And so we kind of just rolled with that this whole time while abiding by the rules that were, the mandates that we're supposed to. And besides that, I think we saw some early season business coming from the bike world, because there's nothing to do besides go outside, and it was a beautiful spring. So people were interested in getting into biking a little bit sooner. So we were really grateful for how everything rolled, even though we are down, and the PPP has certainly helped us pay our full-time staff and keep them their full hours. We were able to kind of make some sales on social media, kind of do the swipe up, and people could look at our inventory, our used bike inventory and whatnot. So whoever did that, I've heard from other businesses that they actually did pretty well selling on social media compared to normal, because people were at home flipping through their phone all day long. So anyways, that's kind of the short on us. We feel for all the businesses that we've heard about, either going out of business or having a really tough time. As we have definitely felt it, but it's not, it wasn't something that said, I don't know how we're going to survive. It was like, okay, how do we do something different to survive? And we were able to kind of accommodate that and have had a really good feedback from our customer base.
Great. Thank you so much, Eric. I'm going to go ahead, circle back and see if Andrea Antoine with Be Bad Productions is with us. And Andrea, if you are on the phone, you can press *6 to unmute yourself. Okay, then I am gonna just double check. Did I miss any businesses on the line? I think I got everyone. If I missed you, feel free to speak up. Okay, then next, before I open it up to Assembly member questions, and so Assembly members, if you have questions, feel free to put yourself in the queue. Were there any businesses that wanted to add something based on the discussion so far? Okay, I'm not hearing any other additions from our businesses. I want to say thank you so much to everyone for taking the time to come and chat with us and share your experience. I'm going to go ahead and move on to Assembly member questions. Mr. Weddleton.
Oh, I don't know if there's anyone there to address this, but one of the speakers said that, they're worried about when your employees come in that you have to take their temperature and worried about HIPAA rules and so on. And I don't believe that you actually have to take their temperature, you just have to inquire. But I don't think HIPAA rules apply that's between doctors and patients, and that's not, didn't appear that her business was a medical thing, but, just kind of speaking in regards to the risk of having employees come back and, do we carry a liability and so on? Thanks. But is there staff there, an expert on these things? Or is there staff at this meeting?
We do have members of the administration here, so do any of them want to speak to the protocols around temperatures for employees?
Here, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Go ahead, Kate. Ms. Vogel.
Yeah, so for those who don't know, I'm the municipal attorney. We have been looking into this issue. Mr. Weddleton is correct. HIPAA doesn't normally apply in this exact context. So it isn't a HIPAA problem for employers to take the temperature of employees. Also, employees don't have a right to come to work sick. That's something else that I think I had never given any thought to before COVID struck. And I think many employees are used to thinking about this as something they get to decide for themselves. What we've learned in the pandemic is obviously coming to a place when you are sick is something that is not your right. And so that's something for employers to know. We are generally, urging people to be respectful of confidentiality and privacy issues when we're talking about specifically and that requirement to be for, or desire.
Sorry, Kate, you're coming in and out a little bit. You're breaking up a little bit. Can you repeat those last couple sentences?
And I wasn't being that clear anyway. So yes, essentially, if you've seen a requirement from us, and I don't think there are very many that apply where you're required to do a temperature screening. We're not requiring you to do something that's illegal. And again, the fundamental point is that employees do not have a right to come to work sick. The employer's obligation to not knowingly allow a sick employee.
Thank you. Anything further, Mr. Weddleton?
Just for the businesses who are worried that one of the main insurance brokers, RISQ, did a seminar last week that it was fairly extensive. It was a couple hours that did discuss specifically the risk, and liability issues with reopening. And if anyone emails me, I can send a link to their presentation.
Great. Thank you. Ms. Zolotel?
My question's not about HIPAA. It looks like Mr. Constance is, if you don't want to switch topics yet.
Sure, I can go to Mr. Constant.
Thanks. just a note for the public, covered entities according to the Federal Department of Health and Human Services include doctors, clinics, psychologists, dentists, chiropractors, nursing homes, pharmacies, but only if they transmit information electronically, health insurance providers, HMOs, company health plans, and government programs that pay for Medicaid, Medicare, etc. They're clearinghouses or third-party administrators for health plans, CPAs that deal with health plans, attorneys that deal with health plans, etc. So none of it has to do with general public conducting business. It just doesn't apply. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Zolotel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Weddleton kind of touched on the question I wanted to ask was the businesses' perspectives about how it was working with their insurance. I hear the trepidation and the concern, but I'm kind of curious what advice has been given by insurance companies to them, and how all of that side of things have gone. I know we need clarity potentially on the other side, but for right now, are there any additional guidelines or additional requirements that insurance is telling you that it would require in order to cover any potential claims? And that's not to any specific operator, but if someone's had a exchange with their insurance, I would love to learn more about that.
All right, so it doesn't sound like anyone's popping up for that question, but if any folks want to, you can reach out to any of the Assembly members if you go to our website, and you can find our emails there. I believe both Mr. Weddleton and Ms. Zolotel would appreciate any follow-up on their questions. Next, I do want to turn to the administration. There was a couple of things that were discussed and want to get their perspective on. So first is utility relief. That's something that the administration has the federal versus state versus local, if someone from the administration can touch on that subject as well.
Mr. Chair, this is Jason Bockenstedt, and I apologize. I'm commuting between a couple of different meetings, so if you can't hear me all that great, I'll be back in the office here in about 5 minutes and on the computer. But to answer your first question, yes, we are certainly interested in what impact there will be on individuals in regards to their ability to pay utilities, electric, gas, things like that. And we're trying to get as much information from our utilities, MLMP, AWU, in terms of what they're seeing, as well as doing some initial outreach to some of the other non-municipal utilities. So hopefully here in the coming day and within hopefully the next week or two, we'll have a better sense of what that looks like. So we'll have more on that. In terms of your second question, I believe we will be talking about this a little bit more later in regards to the Small Business Stabilization Fund, but just very high level, the way that we have set up this pilot program is that if you received or applied for any of the federal programs, that you were not eligible for this pilot program that we are setting up. But we are certainly, as we have told the Assembly, interested in seeing all of the information that we gather from this pilot program. And, as we move forward, if changes need to be made in terms of who we allow to be eligible, if they receive either state or federal, that is something that is going to be a worthwhile conversation.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Buckenstein. Okay, I'll go ahead and turn back to assembly members. Any other questions while we have these businesses on the line? I'm not sure how long they'll be able to stay. They probably have work to do. Okay, I'm not seeing anyone. So with that, I want to really thank all of the businesses for taking the time to share your stories and the impacts of COVID-19, and look forward to continuing to see what we can do to mitigate some of those impacts. And for those who can stay, I think you'll be hearing some interesting perspectives here shortly. Otherwise, thank you so much. So we're a little bit ahead of schedule. So hopefully we have folks from our next group able to attend. So we're going to turn it over to lending institutions. So we have 2 institutions plus 1 statement that I am going to read, and I'm going to ask Desiree if you can queue up the document from Wells Fargo. And so for this next segment, we're going to have our lending institutions talk about PPP and then just generally about their operations and how they've worked with businesses and any snafus that they have seen over the last several weeks. So I'm going to read this, but if we can try to zoom in a little bit on that document so folks can read it a little more legibly. So this is from Wells Fargo. Quote, we are committed to supporting our small business customers in a variety of ways. Since the beginning of this health crisis, Wells Fargo has provided substantial credit and liquidity to our customers to help weather these uncertain times. In the month of March alone, we extended nearly $80 billion in new and increased commitments and outstanding loans to customers, including consumers, small businesses, and companies in the U.S. We acknowledge that the past few months have been difficult for our small business customers, and we continue to work as quickly as possible to prepare as many applications as we can for submission to the U.S. SBA. Since the second round of funds became available for the Paycheck Protection Program, Wells Fargo has received SBA guarantees for more than 160,000 applications with total loan amount over $10 billion, and we continue to process tens of thousands more in support of our small business customers. We will submit completed applications until funds are no longer available and continue to provide additional help to our small business customers during these unprecedented times in the form of fee waivers, payment deferrals, suspension of negative credit reporting, and other efforts. Key facts about Wells Fargo's PPP application pool. More than 50% are for loan amounts of $25,000 or less. More than 80% are for companies that have less than 10 employees. Approximately 145,000 applications have booked and funded, totaling $9 billion. We remain fully committed to supporting small businesses in Alaska and across the nation. Our support for small business customers goes beyond the PPP and will be our main focus as we continue to offer support for our customers and assist in other ways. We will continue to provide accommodations with existing products, including fee waivers, increases to lines of credit, and through our philanthropic efforts aimed at the wider small business community. We continue to work with nonprofits to assist businesses and have donated $17 million to date as part of an overall $175 million effort to assist those impacted by COVID-19. Resources will be deployed to meet the urgent needs of small businesses, including support for community development, financial institutions, state, city, small business relief funds, and programs that provide financing and technical assistance to entrepreneurs. We want to do all we can during this difficult time. We are committed to helping small businesses as they navigate these trying times. And that was authored by David J. Kennedy, who is the Alaska Regional Communications Officer. That document is available on our work sessions page. So if you go to www.muni.org, you go to the Assembly website, there is a work sessions page on that website, and you can find that document. So Lena asked the questions, are those figures for Alaska? My assumption is that those figures are nationally, because those are pretty big figures. With that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Robert McNaughton, Executive Director of Business and Commercial Services at Alaska USA.
Thank you. I appreciate the time, and I agree with you. I think those numbers that you're hearing are absolutely nationally for them, just because we have sort of an idea of where we stand and the number of deals. But you know, it's an interesting perspective, and I appreciate hearing from the business owners. I mean, the last few months has been challenging for everybody, but to hear the different challenges with regards to not only are they trying to find funds and grants available, but also trying to navigate what they're allowed to do within the businesses and what they're not allowed to do. The unemployment for a lot of the employees that were laid off, they don't want to come back and work for the wages they were making out better, you know, on unemployment. So I know there's challenges from the business side, and in hearing some of the testimony this morning is very clear about that. The way I like to describe this, and I think that the banks would probably agree, this was like building an airplane while it was in flight and flying. Every day we would come in and there would be new, you know, the interim final rule from SBA was changed, or there was new additions. Several times after we closed loans, the rules changed, like for instance, seasonal funding was allowed, and loans that we had closed and funded were being reversed off the system, reapplied the new rules. And so you can imagine that's double the work to try to get another person taken care of. For us, we did about 600 loans in the first round of funding for $55 million. Again, there was a lot of trials and tribulations trying to get to that point. There wasn't a whole lot of automation. We were doing most of that by hand, and people working shifts throughout the days and into the evenings to get into the E-Trans system, which is the SBA submission program. Total after the first round, and this number is fluid because, as most of you know, the second round is there's still funding available. We've done over 1,700 loans for $92 million, almost $93 million. And most of that has been funded. And a lot of that is in the Anchorage area. We have opened it up at the first round was basically for members of Alaska USA. Now we are opened up to anybody that qualifies for membership with Alaska USA, and as long as geographically you're within an area that we service, or if you can qualify for membership, we'll open an account and then submit the applications. It slowed down quite a bit, and then I think the next you know, the next phase of this will be the state's money that they're going to start making available. It sounds like the application will possibly be online starting on the 26th of May. But for the general thing, I think we've worked through it. The second, you know, the technology in the second round was very interesting. Most of the banks in Alaska were cut off for a period of time. In the middle of the day, we were processing, and later all banks that were under $1 billion were given access to the portals, and all banks over $1 billion were taken out. And that affected most of the name brands here in the market. And so again, I think, you know, we all have challenges getting through it. I think the forgiveness part is our biggest concern right now. The 11-page application is really what's out there right now for the borrowers to get this money converted to a grant. And then I think the lenders piece is still being worked through, and that deadline's coming up because the first phase of people, their 8 weeks we're starting to get close. I think the first part of June, those will start becoming eligible. But that's sort of the challenges that we've had. I think just the lack of information and then the flow of information. I think for the most part, the lending institutions do a lot of comparisons with each other, and we try to all make sure that we're on the same page. It's more about getting the money out as fast as we can get it out to the community. And I don't think the banks that we've shared information with or credit unions, I think we're all just in the same mission to try to get this money out as soon as we can. And then also the forgiveness part, we're doing the same thing. We're going to make sure that as much of this is forgiven as possible.
Great, thank you so much. Next, we have Mike Huston, the EVP and Chief Lending Officer for Northrim Bank. And I believe we have a presentation, Desiree, if we can cue that up.
Well, good afternoon. This is Mike Houston with Northrim. I just want to make sure that you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you.
Great. So I'd like to provide my perspective on the Paycheck Protection Program. And some of what I'm going to say you've heard a little bit about from Robert, but I've got just a few more details to add. And so I'll start by saying that the program was designed for eligible businesses with less than 500 employees, and it was intended to keep as many people earning a paycheck as possible. The way that the loan amounts were calculated was based on 2.5 times eligible payroll expenses, plus rent or mortgage interest and utility payments. And essentially, all of the loan can be forgiven if you use the funds during the 8 weeks following receipt of those funds for those eligible expenses, and if you maintain employee levels. And as you might imagine, and you've probably heard, there is significant confusion and a lot of nuances to calculating and defining all of those issues. So this was just a massive undertaking to distribute $349 billion as quickly as possible, and to do so in a fair manner based on individual payroll costs by borrower, and then also to do this while avoiding fraud, which is a major consideration when you're talking about this much in federal dollars. So what you see here is a timeline that I thought might help give you a sense of the flurry of activity that occurred. It's a high level view. There's a lot more that happened that I didn't want to bore you with. And I stopped the timeline at the end of the end of April. I could have gone into May, but at any rate, I'll start with in my mind, the issue or the event that really told me that the pandemic was having a historic impact on the economy. And that's when Disneyland closed. Fortunately, I had just completed my tour of Star Wars Land and also a few runs down the Matterhorn. So I was able to leave the day before they closed. I returned to Alaska just in time to spend my 2-week quarantine, having that completed before the CARES Act was signed on March 27th. From that point, it was only about 7 days until the signing of the act and the time at which the SBA was accepting applications. The original expectation as Congress was debating the CARES Act was that the Treasury and SBA would take 30 days to create all of the rules and regulations. They were suggesting that maybe they could get it done in 15, and as it turned out, they started the program within 7 days. 13 days later, from the start on April 3rd, the 349 original the 349 billion in original funding was exhausted. And I can tell you, not only were the funds exhausted, but everybody working in the financial services industry was exhausted as well. We then had a brief break until the 24th, when the president signed the additional $321 billion for round 2 of the program. During that, I'll call it a break, which it wasn't in any way, but it did allow us to continue with the funding process for all of those loans that were previously approved, so that we could get the money in the hands of businesses and start getting it spent in our communities. So that's kind of a big picture overview of a lot of things that happened in a short period of time. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. But if you go to the next slide, just give you an update on where we are with total loan numbers. So throughout the country, the SBA has approved 4,406,000 loans for a total of 512 billion. That means that about 156 billion remain available with the round 2. So we're still accepting applications, and we are expecting that that's going to continue for some period of time. Don't know how long. In Alaska, you can see that we were able to get 9,890 loans approved for about $1.25 billion. That was as of last Saturday. And that is comprehensive for all of the financial institutions throughout the state. So I want to share with you a few statistics about the experience at North Rim. If you go to the next slide. Some of our specific numbers, most of these were, these numbers are effective as of April 16th, but we made a decision early on to assist as many Alaska-based non-customers and customers as we could. And by doing so, we ended up with about 30% of our total applications were non-customers. Not all institutions were able to take on non-customers, and there were a number of reasons for that, part of which was just the overwhelming response for many of the institutions. Just all of the different applications, it's very difficult to process all those in the amount of time that we had. And to give you some indication of that, at North Rim, we ended up approving as many loans in 45 days as we would normally make in 3 years. So we initiated an assembly line process utilizing about 60% of all of our employees, many of whom were working remotely. They were working evenings, nights, weekends, and as a result, we were able to process 27% of all of the loans in Alaska for round 1. That represents, depending on exactly how you measure it, 3 to 4 times what our market share is. So we're pretty proud of what we were able to do to support our communities. What has been frustrating to many small businesses, as well as to the bankers and CPAs and other consultants, is the constant changing of rules and the confusion how to interpret those rules that Robert had already alluded to. So in addition to the 2 versions of the loan application, and then the issuance of the initial final rule, there were 14 updates along the way to those rules, and ended up with a total of 48 different FAQs that all had to be digested, and some of which conflicted with previous FAQs. And the FAQs were really frequently asked questions, but in those FAQs, many of the interpretation of the rules were that's how the SBA communicated it. And that whole process was just applicable primarily to the eligibility of the businesses and then also the calculation of the maximum loan amount. That doesn't really address much of the forgiveness process, which we're just entering into now. So the first part of June, these businesses will be eligible to have those loans forgiven. The SBA released the application for that, as well as the 11-page instruction document last Friday, and we anticipate that there's going to be a significant amount of questions and confusion over that process as well. I do have some hope that based on those 11 pages of guidance, based on my review of that, it provides a lot more direction than what we had initially at the application stage. So again, I'm somewhat optimistic that that part of the process will go a little bit more smoothly. And then kind of just to give you my overall opinion on this, in spite of these frustrations, I think that it is amazing that it's just amazing to see what has been accomplished in a very short period of time with over $500 billion being funded to our small businesses in less than 50 days. So that's what I have, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today.
Great, thank you so much. So that is it for the lending institutions. Do any Assembly members have questions for either Robert or Mike? So this isn't an Assembly member question, but probably a good question nonetheless. From Lena, one of the business owners that we heard from yesterday. So I'm just going to read her comment. Is there a way to get a breakdown of the amounts for those loans? I have been a Northrim customer for 21 years and was not able to get a loan. By the time an officer got back to me on April 8th, no funds were available.
Well, that's disappointing that we didn't get back to her.
Sorry. Go ahead. I just wanted to make sure everyone was muted.
I was just saying that that's disappointing that we weren't able to be more responsive to Lena. That being said, we are taking applications, and so I don't really understand why that would be an issue. So I'd be happy to reach out to her personally and take care of that for her.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And I guess I'll just repeat. So her name is Lena Mariscal with the French Oven, and I'm sure she would appreciate that. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm wondering, this question may be too soon to tell, but how are people doing with their mortgage payments? So do you have, or maybe you might not even have any statistics on this, are they keeping up? I was here back in the mid-'80s, so I'm hoping we don't go down that road again. Just wondering if you have any information along those lines about mortgages.
Yeah, this is Mike Houston, and I do have some information for you, and then maybe Robert can chime in as well. But nationally, we've seen about 8% of borrowers apply for various types of forbearance. In Alaska, that number is 7%. Our foreclosure rate, while it's up first quarter of 2020 compared to year-end 19, it's still at a pretty decent percentage, and it's better than the national average. So we have not seen a significant increase in mortgage issues yet. Of course, part of that is because many of the banks have been, I think, very proactive and been working with borrowers to defer payments and come up with other solutions as well. But overall, the housing market in general has been surprisingly strong, at least to this point.
This is Robert McNaughton, and I would definitely agree with what Mike's saying. I mean, I think the difference today is that the banks are more proactive. I think that we're out in front of some of the problems with regards to deferments, both on homes and on commercial properties. We are out meeting with them, and tenants that are involved, they can get, directing them to the PPP program, and also giving deferments to the landlords that own the properties and stuff. So I think there's a trickle down type of effect. And I think that the more proactive is going to be something that you guys will see as a positive, rather than if you don't make your payment, we're going to start foreclosure.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, I am not seeing any. So a big thank you to Mr. McNaughton and Mr. Houston for joining us today. Really appreciate it. And a thank you to Wells Fargo for providing that statement. So we are going to go ahead and move on to our general economic overview. We heard from Mr. Pop yesterday. We're going to hear from him again today, and as well as John Bittner. So Bill Pop is with the president and CEO of the Anchorage Economic Development Corporation, and John Bittner is the executive director of the Alaska Small Business Development Center. I'll go ahead and turn it over to the two of you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Bill Pop, President and CEO of the Anchorage Economic Development Corporation. It's a pleasure to be with the Assembly and the public again in this setting. Today, I am going to be providing a quick snapshot of where things stand in the Anchorage economy. I have some limited information that I've been able to obtain from today's data release from the state of Alaska, but I think it'll give you a picture of where we are at now. I just want to set the stage for this by where we were just before the COVID-19 pandemic started to flex its impacts on our community. So we ended 2019 still in recession. The latest final date, as close as we can get to final data and jobs numbers, tells us that we ended the year down 400 jobs. And we had thought that the fourth quarter was showing some improvement in the preliminary numbers, but as we got the firm numbers yesterday, we have identified the fact that we actually started to turn back into significant negative territory in November and December, with 600 jobs lost in November and 1,000 jobs lost in the Anchorage economy in December. First quarter numbers for this year are preliminary, and the numbers that I'll be talking about from here on are a mix of hard numbers with preliminary numbers. So it's the nature of the way federal data sets work. It takes a while for them to get us the hard numbers, but I'll try and give you as close of an idea of where we are at now. So in February, we had 4.7% unemployment, and we were down about 300 jobs in the preliminary numbers. The 4.7% unemployment was due to a decline in the size of our labor force. And we've been talking about this for a while. This has been a trend that's been going on for the last 4 years, and we believe that this was just a continuation of workers pulling out of the Anchorage economy, mainly to leave the state, seeking opportunity in the lower 48 for any number of reasons. The data that we have today is the April jobs data and unemployment data. These are the preliminary numbers. Our unemployment rate for the city of Anchorage in April was 13.9%. That represents approximately 20,000 workers in that data point being out of work, actively seeking employment, which is something that's very important to note in this data. The data does not include people who may have been put on, have been furloughed from their job, with an understanding from their employer that they would eventually be called back, they are not viewed as being unemployed in this data set. They are viewed as being merely temporarily on hold, I guess is the best way I could describe it. This is a pretty big deviation in terms of the total numbers that are more likely to be in place. In looking at the recent announcements of the total so far of first-time unemployment claims, that broke 95,000 for the state of Alaska. And from a proportional basis, we can extrapolate that conservatively, there was at least 40,000 of those individuals based in Anchorage. That is a very substantial number. It is a pretty big impact to our community. And when combined with the previous levels of unemployment, that would probably take our overall unemployment today, give or take, in the 45,000 range. 40 to 45,000, right in that range, because we have had employers starting to bring people back to work recently. But this is a pretty tough time in a marketplace that has a labor force of just over 136,000 in terms of Anchorage residents. We are seeing job losses of substantial nature that are being recorded in this initial survey. I want to caution everyone that these numbers are likely understated. We've been seeing this trend in this preliminary data coming out of the federal government that uses a telephone sampling survey model to put this data together, with some help and cajoling from our economists at the State of Alaska Department of Labor, trying to help, fine tune these numbers. But it's always hard to tell until we get the actual payroll numbers, which don't come out for another 5 to 6 months. When we look at the Anchorage metropolitan statistical area, the state of Alaska did release data on that today, which would be Anchorage and Mat-Su combined, 23,500 jobs lost in the recordable jobs that were there from the previous from the previous month to that month. So that is a previous year's April to this year's April. So that's a pretty significant loss of jobs. I would project conservatively that 16,000 of those jobs were in Anchorage and 7,000 of those jobs were in the Mat-Su when you look at overall job losses. This is a tough spot to be in right now. These are huge numbers beyond the pale of anything that we've seen in modern history in the state. They are impactful. They are definitely going to have some profound longer-term effects on our economy. It is going to represent some significant changes in our economy when we recognize that the tourism season for Alaska and Anchorage is pretty much turning into a lost year, other than some dribs and drabs of tourism opportunities that may still develop, as well as in-state tourism. But anything related to out-of-state visitors has pretty much been lost for this year. And in talking to the tourism sector, there is not a lot of optimism that we're going to come anywhere close to what we had in 2019 when we go into 2021. Next year is going to be hopefully better, but will not be anywhere near what we saw last year, which was a record year of tourism in our city and our state. We are seeing some fairly significant losses on the statewide numbers for oil and gas. The previous month's numbers, or excuse me, the last year's numbers showed that we had well over 10,000 jobs in oil and gas. The current numbers for the state is down to 8,900, and that was in the month of April and only covers a portion of the month. So it's my expectation that we will likely see that number continue to go down as we get into the May numbers. When we look at other sectors and look across the board statewide in the numbers that have been released, not one sector got away without having losses of some significant nature. Other than the federal government, which was the one area of employment that did increase in April, likely due to COVID-19 response, and it was up about 700 jobs, 4.8%. But otherwise, it was a slate of job losses across all industry sectors. These are some pretty profound numbers. We're still trying to understand them in more detail, but I wanted to share this with the Assembly just to give you a sense of scope and scale of where we are at now with the losses that we saw in April. Mr. Chairman, I'll just close by just talking a little bit about the coming months. As we begin to reopen, I think it's going to be a little bit slower than some might expect in terms of people coming back to work. I think we heard a number of examples in the small business owners who addressed the Assembly earlier in this session about some of the concerns that employees have, that employers have, and that customers have about the safety of either going back to work or going in and patronizing different businesses. It's going to be a period of adjustment as we continue to move forward before people feel more safe as a whole in terms of getting out and about. I think that we're going to have some challenges with employers finding workers, which sounds a little odd given the number of people that are on unemployment. But when you have a circumstance that we have with the very generous unemployment benefits through July, I get the sense, having talked to a number of employers about this, there are exceptions to this, but there are businesses that are trying to recall employees or trying to find employees to replace those who've decided they don't want to come back to work. They're having a challenge finding candidates, and in part, it's either implied or spoken to directly that right now they're doing pretty well on the unemployment level, on the unemployment benefits that they're receiving, and that they want to wait and see what happens in terms of the safety, life and safety issues, in terms of the disease and whether or not there's a resurgence and how things work in the reopening. So we're going to have a tough summer. We're going to have a tough fall. We're going to have a tough winter. And it's going to take us a while to get back into any kind of semblance of recovering some of these massive losses that we've seen. With that, Mr. Chair, I think I would rather save most of my time for Q&A and would defer to Mr. Bittner to go ahead and give his presentation. Thank you, and I'll stand by for questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Pop. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Mr. John Bittner with the Alaska Small Business Development Center.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the chance to talk, Mr. Chair. As you mentioned, I'm John Bittner. I'm the Executive Director of the Alaska Small Business Development Center. We're a statewide organization housed within the University of Alaska Anchorage, and our mission is to help small businesses start, grow, survive, and thrive. To give you a feel for sort of what that means in Alaska, on a statewide basis, about 73,354 businesses qualify as small businesses under the SBA definitions, and that's less than 500 employees. Of that 73,000, 56,946 or so are what are called non-employer firms. So the vast majority of the businesses in the state are firms that have no employees. Of the remaining 20,000 to 21,000 businesses, 15 or so thousand are 1 to 19 employees, and the rest are 20 or more. So as a percentage of the overall number of businesses in the state, small businesses represent about 99.1, 99.3% of all the businesses in Alaska. On an Anchorage basis, that number is pretty significantly higher. It's 8,000 or so businesses under 50 in the Anchorage area. And that is pretty comparable with what you would expect based on the city's size. And that doesn't include the non-employer firms, though. So what we do is every year we work with a variety of businesses across the state to try and help them navigate the difficulties of running a business in the best of times. We ran a survey, a statewide survey early, we released it fairly closely before the COVID-19 emergency happened. And we were actually fairly positive. It was very optimistic results. We were coming out of sort of a slight decline in the economy, or not more than a slight decline. And we were seeing a lot of optimism, a lot of new capital infusion, a lot of indications that they were going to increase their staff numbers. They were going to staff up. And then, of course, COVID-19 hit. The economy basically shut down on a global scale. And the tone shifted almost to the polar opposite. AEDC has done several really excellent surveys outlining the number of Anchorage businesses that are concerned that they're going to have to close. We've seen similar surveys in the Mat-Su, the Kenai, rural Alaska, and other communities across Alaska. It is a systemic problem right now. In response to that, the federal government passed the CARES Act a while back, and I know that some of these numbers you've already seen, but I wanted to go through just one more time. The PPP loans nationally, 4.3 million of them were made. In Alaska, 9,890 so far for about 1.25 billion. An interesting way to look at this, because if you look at the gross numbers, Alaska is pretty far at the bottom of the pack. I think that a better way to look at how broadly dispersed these funds are is to look at it as percentage of eligible payroll. And so Bloomberg News has actually taken all of the firms that could qualify for the PPP in each state, cross-referenced that with the number of employees they have, and then use that as the upper limit of how many, what the top amount that each state would reasonably be able to get through the PPP, because it's primarily meant for payroll. 75% of it needs to be expended on payroll in the 8 weeks after you receive the funding. By that standard, Alaska has received 75% of the eligible payroll in the state through PPP loans. So that's a pretty good achievement rate. It means that there's a large swath of the workforce that has been able to access these funds, and hopefully we'll see that reflected in the employment numbers going forward. Bill mentioned that some employers are having difficulty convincing their employees to come back to work. This is a particularly difficult problem for those businesses that have received a PPP loan. Like I mentioned, you have to expend the funds within 8 weeks after receiving them, primarily on payroll, in order to get it forgiven. The Department of Labor has released several guidances saying that if an employer offers the person on unemployment a job, and they turn it down, that they are probably no longer eligible for that unemployment. Now, there's a lot of employers that are not terribly comfortable turning in their employees in that manner, but it is a concern, and going forward, I suspect it might be even bigger, a bigger problem as more of the PPP funds are deployed. There's another loan program out there that the CARES Act funded, and that's the Economic Injury Disaster Loans. These are the SBA's more traditional disaster loan programs. They were deployed in the Anchorage area after the major earthquake a few years back. Nationally, about 250,000 of these loans have been made for almost $25 billion. In Alaska, 572 have been made for about $50 million so far. The distribution of these loans, was slower than the national average for reasons that I still am not quite understanding. We've started to catch up. We're on par with states like Vermont and Wyoming now, but up until recently, only 8 of these loans have been made in the state. We are seeing an upper limit on these of about 150,000 for the most part. And I think that's a reflection of the smaller amount of money that the federal government put into this program. It was only recapitalized, I believe, at $50 billion in the second round of sort of CARES funding. Geographically speaking, not a lot of these loans have been made outside of the Anchorage, Fairbanks, and somewhat in the southeast and Kenai areas. You go north of Fairbanks, and there really aren't many of these out there. And these are loans directly through the federal government. The last piece of federal funding that deserves mention is the EIDL loan advance grants. And these are grants up to $10,000 for businesses based on the number of employees that you have. It's $1,000 per employee, and Alaskans received about 7,261 of these, worth about $25 million. So all in the last sort of month or so, about $1.4 billion in various federal funds have been deployed to small businesses across the state. One thing that I really want to drive home is that that is in large part, because the vast majority of that is PPP funds, that is in large part to the yeoman's work that Alaska's lending institutions did. Many of them were working 12-hour days, seven days a week. It was actually, absolutely amazing, especially in the first round, how much of those funds were deployed and how quickly they did it, given the speed at which the program was passed. In addition to that, there are new funding mechanisms coming online. The CARES Act did provide $1.2 billion to the state of Alaska to deploy in a variety of ways. The legislature has recently approved the governor's proposed allocations. 569 million is going to direct municipal relief. 290 million is going to small business relief directly, and then 331 million is going to health-related COVID-19 costs. The remainder is mainly going to direct agency funding. The two pieces that I'd like to talk a little bit about today is the small business relief and the direct municipal relief. The small business relief, the $290 million that they allocated through DCC and ADA, is called the Alaska Cares Program, and this is going to be direct grants between $5,000 and $100,000 to businesses across the state that meet certain criteria. The program is slated to open May 26th. I think that there were some changes made to the eligibility criteria recently that may push that date back a little bit, but hopefully it'll be next week, ideally. The funding is going to be, like I said, directed through DCC, AD, and ADA, but they've had an RFP out for a third-party financial institution, Credit Union One, who is going to accept and process all of the grant applications. They're hoping to be able to distribute about $150 million per month, and they've set aside 20% for communities under 5,000 people. They'll be dispersed on a first-come, first-served basis, and the eligible expenses are pretty much what you would expect: payroll, short-term and credit card debt, utilities, buying personal protective equipment, business-related equipment, and replenishing inventory in order to reopen. That last one's particularly important because what we're seeing is a lot of these businesses have been closed for so long. They're in arrears with their vendors, and the vendors are reluctant to provide more product before they can get paid for the stuff that's already been distributed. And so this will allow them to make back payments on what they owe and replenish their stock. So as the economy opens up, they'll be able to really take advantage of that. In terms of eligibility, it's businesses under 50 employees. As I mentioned, that's a fairly large swath, about I think 20,000 or so in the state and 8,000 or so in Anchorage. And you have to have been in business before March 11th. There used to be a restriction. If you had received PPP or EIDL funds, you were not eligible for this program, but they've changed the criteria, is my understanding. The Commissioner of Commerce mentioned it several times in a meeting this morning, that now any receipt of any federal funding will not preclude you from this program and will not reduce the amount of grant that you are eligible to receive. So if that's the case, that'll be, I think, an excellent change to the program. The reason being, one of the unintended consequences of restricting businesses who have received federal funding before from receiving additional grants is that they tend to then leave federal grant money on the table. They'll choose to forgo EIDL or PPP and focus on these grant programs. And right now, Alaskan businesses, and I know you heard from several of them this morning, are in a pretty rough spot. And so the more money we can deploy into the economy, the better off we're going to be. And I think that changes like this really reflect that. Of course, the Anchorage Assembly passed their business grant program, which is also fantastic. I appreciate the speed at which you did that. The $1 million there is going to go a long way for an interesting beta program to really get money out on the street to businesses and nonprofits. In terms of what we're expecting going forward, I think that Bill really hit it on the head in that there are some rough times ahead, economically speaking, between the reduction in statewide revenues from the oil price drop to the loss of local tourism tax revenues from the lost tourism season. We're going to see a real crunch on the state and local government levels on top of an already rough time on a private sector economic level. And that's going to be compounded by the fact that seasonal businesses like tourism and the commercial fishing and a few others were particularly hard hit in this downturn and were not very well positioned to receive the federal dollars that were available out there. So going forward, I think as that local government money hits the streets, and many communities are already planning and getting ready to deploy small business development grants and things along those lines, that's really going to be important to keeping the economy going. And I encourage anyone on the assembly here, if they are thinking of doing something similar in Anchorage or expanding the program you already have, this money will not be a silver bullet. One deployment will not solve all the problems that are out there. I would suggest thinking in terms of a phased approach to trying to deploy the money over a period of time, because as Bill mentioned, we're not looking at this being over in 1 or 2 or 3 months. We're looking 6, 9, 12 months down the road, and it's important to plan for that. And with that, I'll open myself up to any questions you may have.
Great. Thank you both. I have one question from Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to both Bill and John. Hi, John. It's been a while. Nice to see you. I have kind of a, I guess, bigger picture question about unemployment and what it means for businesses. I heard Bill mention, and I've heard John mention, and others have as well, John Littleton, others have as well, that folks are declining to go back to work because the pay is too low in the industry where they were working before compared to the unemployment. While that's certainly a struggle for businesses, you know, I think about my mom as an example. She works seasonally. She's on unemployment. She gets $400 a week. So, you know, she gets $1,600 a month to live on. She suddenly gets $1,000 a week and now has $4,000 a month. Of course, that's only, what, $48,000 a year. So we're not talking some exorbitant amount. It's certainly less than all of us on this call make without benefits. And so I guess I want to pull apart the narrative a little bit that, you know, oh, people are making way too much on unemployment and they're not wanting to go back to their normal businesses. I mean, the reality is that they're making an okay amount without any benefits, and that's still better than what they were making in their field before. And so I don't know how to solve that. It's a sort of structural, you know, it's a big issue, but what are your thoughts on that, and how do we use this opportunity to shape a different narrative going forward about what pay discrepancy, basically?
Thank you for the question. I actually, you know, you're absolutely right in terms of the gross amounts that people on unemployment, even with the expanded benefits, are eligible for. The jobs that, or the industries that this is hitting, or this is impacting particularly hard, are the ones you would expect that have employees in the under $50,000 range, where it becomes a bit of a wash. It's understandable that they would not want to come back to work. Unfortunately, the way that the system is set up is that if the job becomes available again, and this is sort of a function of the way that, you know, we would traditionally look at unemployment as opposed to right now, which is a slightly different, I think, philosophical goal or intent. Once they're offered that job, they sort of are immediately ineligible for the unemployment rolls. And so that it's more of a function with how they try to get the money out to the individuals to sort of keep them going. And that's, I think, the main problem there. Then Bill can weigh in. He's probably way more versed on unemployment and employment than I am.
Well, I think John's hit it on the nail head in terms of, you know, once an employer is calling back a furloughed employee, that's what we're talking about, is employees who've been furloughed, which is a temporary status, and they now have a job available for them. There is the good cause premise in unemployment for reasons to deny. And the two that seem to be rising to the top is whether or not the worker feels safe going back to work, or whether or not there is available childcare that would allow them to go back to work. You know, so there's you know, there are a lot of policy contradictions in the situation that we are in right now, because another element to this too is that the PPP program, if you're an employer and you're trying to take full advantage of the forgiveness part, you're trying to get employees back on the payroll as quickly as you can if you haven't already. And to not be able to call them back means that you don't get the forgiveness element in that PPP program, is my understanding of the way the system would work. And then you're at a point where either having to give the money back or turning it into a low interest 1% loan. It's more debt on your ledger sheet, which is right now something no business wants, given the circumstances that they're dealing with. You know, so now the business is in the conundrum of, you know, of the challenges that they have with these two contradicting programs. And then also, quite frankly, from the employee's perspective, this is short-term money. And admittedly, it's good short-term money, really good short-term money in that wage range. But please understand for those employees that when you decide, well, you know, the money's run out, now it's time to go back to work, The business may not be there because of the inability to get their business back up and functioning fully. So that's another risk in all of this too. It's complex, and it is, the nature of policy done in haste, trying to respond to a unprecedented period of circumstances of disastrous proportion to everyone, employees and employers both.
Can I follow up, Mr. Chair?
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks to you both. I think you mostly just responded about the nature of the program and what's allowed and what isn't. And I think I'm asking a more philosophical question about the way we employ people in this country and in our city. And if we think that $48,000 without any benefits is too much for them and they should not take that and should get back to work for really low wages, I think that says something about us as a city. And so I guess I'm asking you all to help us who make rules to think bigger about how those rules could be shaped to benefit all of the people in our community.
Thank you. Mr. Constant?
Thanks. Also, a more high-level question, I guess, for both of you, gentlemen. I've heard the mayor express some limited categories that he would see of value in expending of the CARES Act funding that we anticipate receiving around $125 million. The categories he has highlighted specifically, one was childcare service to help people get back to work. One was ensuring, of course, that any of the extraordinary expenses the municipality has had to shoulder due to the pandemic emergency response would not fall on the taxpayers. We know that's somewhere around $10 to $13 million so far. And there are some approaches around homelessness, but barring those matters and really thinking about the broad pool of funds, what would both of you offer as your top 3 or 4 areas for us to laser-like focus on appropriating dollars toward in order to reboot the economy in the most efficacious manner possible?
You want to go first, Bill, or should I?
Go ahead, John.
All right. So based on the feedback we're getting from small businesses across the state, I mean, they've been largely shut down for almost 2 months now. And what that has caused is basically a catastrophic cash flow problem. And in the terms of the contact we've been getting from small businesses, it started off, these are entrepreneurs, these are people that are used to ups and downs. So they were, where do I get the best information? What are the options? What can I do? And they were very positively and proactively trying to sort of, mitigate the storm. In the last week to 10 days, maybe week to 2 weeks, the tone has changed significantly. It has been heartbreaking, I think is really the only way to put it, is people that have spent their lifetimes building these businesses to see them at the brink of failure, not because of anything they did wrong, not because of any problem with their business plan or any, mistakes that they made, but because of an unforeseen global, pandemic that no business plan could have factored in. So I think the best thing for the economy right now is to put a tourniquet on this horrible wound that we've got. These businesses are on the precipice of failing. Some are already failing. So getting them any amount of money that you can as easily and with as few restrictions as possible, while still being fiscally responsible, I think is the best and highest use, because if we don't, we're going to have to, instead of save the economy, rebuild it from a pretty nasty low point. So that would be my 2 cents.
I think that
effectively grants is what I heard. Bill, I would add a caveat that I should have said before, recognizing that although we have a large amount of money, it is a limited amount of money.
Absolutely. And there's no one source of funding or one program that's going to solve this. I mean, even the CARES Act itself, I mean, they had to reauthorize it. It was the largest peacetime relief package that I think Congress has ever passed. And it was a matter of weeks before they had to pass round 2. This is a massive problem. So basically right now, what I think the focus has to be is not how do we solve this problem for 6 months or 12 months down the road. How do we get through the next month, the next 2 months? And then hopefully as the economy starts to unlock a little, these businesses can start, taking on more, generating more revenue on their own. It's going to be a while till they're back to where they were, but it's going to be incremental, all the tools in the toolbox brought to bear to try and save as many as we can. And we're not going to be able to save them all. I mean, that's just an unfortunate truth.
I would echo John's comments. This is triage mode right now. You're doing your best to keep as many businesses still standing at the end of all of this, so that we have a foundation from which to rebuild the economy. And then we have to be thinking in long term. We have to be thinking in a matter of years in terms of getting anywhere close to where we were before this all happened to us. And we have to also recognize that there's going to be a fairly substantial number of displaced workers, numbered in the thousands, who are in industries right now that will not have jobs for them at the end of this situation. And so how do we provide them with opportunities that are intelligently thought out, data-driven, to help get them the the skills training that they need to reskill for other industries to give them an opportunity to get back to work. That isn't going to happen overnight, and that is going to be one of the things that is going to be really challenging in all of this, is managing expectations. There are a lot of things that are going to need to happen, and we don't know how this thing is going to continue to unfold. We don't know what we don't know yet, and it's going to be an ever-changing situation for at least the rest of this year, and going into next year. And because there are just so many unknowns at this point. So I would be focusing, honestly, in some aspects in thinking long-term with this money and where it might be able to be used by the end of this year for long-term purposes, getting it obligated and committed. And then I would also be thinking more so in terms of John's point of view, which is think about getting businesses and workforce through the next month, 2 months, 3 months, and with the premise that we will hopefully get thrown more lifelines from the federal government as this process unfolds.
All right, so thank you both for those responses. I would just kind of try to reiterate what I heard: some kind of grant mechanisms, some kind of retraining programs, and then some kind of long-term thinking projects that will help to kind of lessen the wave frequency of kind of the chaos that we've seen. And I would just note that I am starting to perceive a real strong tunnel vision effect among all the parties who are involved with these very difficult questions, where we're only seeing through the filters of the problem we have right now. And so I agree, we have to look from a higher perspective and be more thoughtful, lest we waste this very rare opportunity to reboot an economy. Thank you all both.
Thank you. Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A comment and a question, since Mr. Constant's question hit on some of the things that I was wanting to know more about, specifically, with so many different streams of assistance available, where are the gaps, and how should we focus on how to help our community get through the next part and then longer term? And I think, thank you both, John and Bill, for your comments on that. I do have a question for Bill about something he mentioned early on in his presentation. And Bill, would you talk a little bit more about the connection between the unemployment rate and the decline in the labor force, particularly, and I understand that some positions in certain industries are harder to fill than others, but there's been some discussion about, for example, people who may have been working in industries hard hit, restaurants that won't fully reopen, who may remain unemployed in that area for a while. What's the possibility of them, for example, working in a construction job? So if you could comment a little bit on that, I'd appreciate it. Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sure. 3 things to cover there. Before the pandemic, we were in a situation where our labor force was in decline, not because of, it was in decline because we were losing workforce from our city. They were leaving our city and for the most part, leaving our state. This now totals over 10,000 people that we have lost from our labor force in the previous 4 years up through February. In February, we had 4.7% unemployment, which I mentioned before. That is unprecedented for middle of winter. That is one of our worst months. And yet in that month, we lost jobs. We lost several hundred jobs in the month of February. And it wasn't because people were, it was because people were leaving our city. It wasn't because they were being laid off. So that was part of a whole nother set of challenges that now has been turned on its ear by the COVID-19 situation. What we have now is in terms of workforce being displaced, you are correct. There are going to be industries, mainly in the services sector, where we're going to see workforce displaced in substantial numbers that now have a set of skill sets, for the most part, honed for a particular industry that will likely not have room for them in terms of available jobs afterwards. It's going to be a surplus, a substantial surplus. How do we retrain them, and how do we do it in a way that is data driven? And I have to tell you that it's going to be a tough conundrum. It's a Rubik's Cube, for lack of better expression, trying to solve and get all the pieces and parts lined up to get the most number of those people into a job in a new industry. And that's predicated on the idea that, for example, using your analogy, the construction industry, a restaurant worker going into the construction industry will likely need some substantial skill, reskilling, new skill set training. But is there going to be a demand for that additional workforce in the construction industry? We're seeing a substantial slowdown in private sector investment in commercial and residential, and in terms of activity this year. Will that extend to next year? I think it might. So we're going to be relying substantially on government infrastructure projects, state, local, and federal, to carry construction and military, carrying forward construction industry jobs. I guess I would leave you with this, both for and also to address Mr. Constant's closing remarks. We can't do it the way Alaskans have always done it, which is we know what we know and therefore we're going to do it. We need to be doing research because this is going to be different. We're going to need to understand what the demands are going to be for available workforce. And we're going to need to clearly understand how quickly we can reskill these workers through short, sharp training programs. It's going to take a lot of research.
Thank you. I guess as a matter of preview, before I get to you, Ms. Kennedy, we do have a segment on workforce training at a future roundtable. So I really appreciate those comments, Mr. Pop, on that. Ms. LaFrance, do you have anything else before I go on in the queue?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm good.
Thanks. Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so now I'm depressed again. Yesterday was bad enough. I was kind of starting to track with both Bill and John's presentations about how bad this really is and how bleak the future looks. Given the long period that we believe this economic struggle is going on, and given the idea that there are short-term resources available. It really did get me to thinking about, okay, so now to a certain extent, we're trying to throw the tourniquet on whatever's bleeding the most. But at the same time, there becomes a time when you really have to begin the triage process. And that's an awful thing to think about. And it's, an awful question to ask. But I was just wondering if there's really been any conversations that have come about recently, or maybe some information about identifying certain criteria that might indicate that a business just isn't going to make it. And if that's available, at what point do you start implementing something like that when you're deciding where these limited resources go? I mean, at what point do you say no to that business because we don't think you're going to make it, and we only have the ability to actually save this business? So anyway, I don't know if you've actually gotten to that level in the research part of it, but obviously, like I said, there's a lot of research to be done. But anyway, if there's been any kind of conversation about how do you tell a business now that they're really just not going to make it, or do you? So thank you.
And I'm happy to lead off on that if that's okay. A large part of what the SBDC does is give hard news to small businesses. Not everything we do, like if the business model doesn't pencil, if the financials don't work, if your overhead and is just isn't reasonable for a viable business model, I mean, we have to tell you that. So we haven't done as much of that during this crisis because, quite frankly, it's kind of dependent on what happens next. And as far as I can tell, nobody knows. Like, is there going to be another round of federal funding? It's unclear. The House passed something. The Senate seems reluctant. Is there going to be, a long-term economic downshift, especially in Alaska, or is there, is oil going to bounce back better than before? It's hard to prognosticate it. What I would suggest is, in the short term, the easiest way to tell whether or not a business is going to survive is whether or not the business survives. The amount of money that we're deploying now just they aren't huge pots of money. They're not going to last long. And so if your business model was broken, or if you were on your last legs, going into this, a $10,000 infusion, a $50,000 infusion probably isn't going to get you very far, especially as the economy opens up and customers start coming back. What I would suggest that later down the line, once we're past this sort of immediate catastrophic problem and the economy, or at least the communities, start being able to go back out to the businesses, if there is another funding mechanism, it's going to have to involve something similar to what the SBDC does. I mean, you have to pop the hood on their financials. You have to look at their profit models. You have to see, their profit and loss statements, things like that. And the problem with that is it takes a significant amount of effort on somebody's part to do that. And so one of the reasons that the programs that are out there right now don't is because the staffing and the time required, it goes up exponentially. But in a follow-on funding system, like if 3-4 months down the line, 5 months down the line, the municipality decides, or anybody decides, to do another funding program, it could be more limited in scope, and you could be able to target specific industries or specific business types, and that would allow you to sort of narrow that number down to a manageable level. That would be the way I would suggest. I'll let Bill weigh in if he's got a alternate theory.
I think John has hit it on the nail head. It is very difficult right now in this flood of disaster. It's not the time to be talking to people about how they're managing their lifeboat, but getting them in the lifeboat. We are just in a really tough strait. Our survey work back in April of Anchorage businesses showed about 16% of the businesses that we asked, is your business at risk of closing permanently, said yes. 22% said they didn't know one way or the other, and then 61% shared that they felt strongly that they were going to be fine. So that's about 39% of businesses, 40% of businesses, round number, that are in some form of risk of going away. And this is why we need to try and help them build the bridge across this raging river that they're trying to get across to safety on the other side. And the short-term needs are going to definitely take priority, and then we can phase into getting into more substantive conversations about triaging businesses once we've got them over to the other side of this torrent that we're trying to get them across.
Thank you. So we have about, anything else, Ms. Kennedy?
No, Mr. Chair, thank you. I just was going to say thank you to both of them. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, so we have about 6 minutes left before we need to move on to the next group of presenters. So I'll try to finish the queue up. Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to say briefly first that I identify with Ms. Quinn Davidson's comments, and that this disaster reminds me a bit of the earthquake when you didn't know if it was your circle that was going to suffer catastrophic loss or some other through no fault of your own. We're all sort of behind a veil of ignorance, which is why I support a robust social safety net for individuals. And now it seems like we are attempting to create something of a social safety net for small businesses. And perhaps over the long term, this will make people more sympathetic to those who fall on hard times. But I want to ask a question about workman's comp. And I know that Bill, you had mentioned that fear of coronavirus is or is not, first of all, is it or is it not a viable reason to decline coming back to work? And then if it is not, and people are forced back to work, if they do contract the coronavirus, can they recover from workman's comp? And then finally, we had a small business owner in the previous session indicate that they wanted liability relief from the federal government, I would assume, to prevent them from being sued. But to me, that actually seems sort of counterproductive, because if an employer is going to force their employee back to work, but not, for example, require customers to wear face masks or otherwise provide a safe working environment, and then that employees contracts coronavirus, why shouldn't they be able to recover either through workman's comp or a third-party lawsuit?
Well, I'm not a workers' comp insurance expert, but I will do my best to answer this question based on the work of the Economic Resiliency Task Force. So number of policy issues that are difficult to deal with here, Assemblymember Dunbar. The first is that we don't have clear guidance from the State of Alaska Department of Labor and Workforce Development on what will be acceptable reasons from a safety point of view for not coming back to work. The ERTF has recommended limited liability relief be aggressively pursued at the federal level, where if a business is providing a safe environment based on the guidelines of the municipality, the state of Alaska, the Centers for Disease Control in terms of workplace safety issues, that they should not be liable if someone still comes down with the disease, because they've made every reasonable effort. Right now, there is no clarity on that point, and the businesses that flagrantly violate those kinds of guidelines should be held liable. Those are reasoned issues. Safety issues for employees, if you have a compromised immune system, if you have any number of health issues, those could be reasons under the good cause section of our unemployment regulations, both local and national, to state, I do not feel safe coming back to work while this pandemic is going on. But this all comes down to the State of Alaska Department of Labor and Workforce Development providing guidance on these issues. And they have so far stated that they will deal with these all on a case-by-case basis. And so this is a huge gray area for businesses who are trying to do a good job, not trying to force people back. I worry about that characterization. They are trying to get back to work, trying to get back in, to where there is a business for the employees to come back to work for. And they are trying to be conscious of the safety of their employees and of their customers. And so this is a really tough area that we need to sort out with the help of the state of Alaska, who is supposed to be the arbiter of these issues. That I think kind of covers it in general terms to the best that I can. The Economic Resiliency Task Force has supported the federal government, passing rules, regulations, or laws that would provide limited liability relief for businesses who are conforming to the current standards and guidelines.
Well, I just follow up on that and say that works if the local guidelines are following, for example, CDC recommendations. But right now, we aren't mandating as stringent requirements as the CDC is. And I think this is also an issue for the municipality as an employer. For example, if we start running our bus system again and we have bus drivers, and we aren't requiring people who get on the buses to wear cloth face coverings, why shouldn't we be liable in workman's comp or in some other form of liability? Because we haven't provided a safe working environment for our employees. And I just feel like employees are consistently left out of these conversations. But thank you guys for the work you're doing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So I am going to go ahead and read a comment from Mr. Nolan Clouda, and then I'm going to go to Ms. Zalato, and then we're going to move on. So from Mr. Clouda, there's really only anecdotal data about people declining to come back to work because of UI unemployment insurance benefits. Technically, they lose their eligibility if they decline work. We don't know if it's as much of an issue as some people claim, and perhaps Mr. Clouda can go into that during his presentation during the next segment. With that, I will end this segment with Ms. Zalato.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I very much am concerned, like Mr. Dunbar and Ms. Quinn Davidson are, about employees, both as to making sure that they're making adequate living wages and if they are, in fact, protected from exposure. I've had the unfortunate privilege, I guess, to represent an employee now who was losing their job due to COVID-19, and while the employer was being as gracious as possible, it was felt very one-sided for that individual and very stressful. So with those comments, I do have a question. I'd like to know a little bit more. I know there's been a subgroup around businesses owned by people of color, but we know historically that people of color are often less likely to get grants, loan programs, and the like. Are you aware of any work being done to ensure that that's more equitable, or do you have policy recommendations so that we can hopefully, as we go through and do this CARES Act, work with the CARES Act to help head off those inequities or to make the process more equitable? Because I've heard some concerns already, and I know that we already have the historic kind of data. So I'd like us to move forward in an as equitable fashion as possible. Thank you.
I'll go first if that's okay, John. The Economic Resiliency Task Force just formed the sub-working group you referenced, and they have now begun their work and are developing recommendations, which I'm expecting to be coming forth the first week of June. I believe that that group is highly motivated to get recommendations out the door, and our next ERTF meeting is on June the 1st due to the holiday. But throughout the conversation, I'd like to just touch on a couple of points because there seems to be a bit of a tone here that I want to make sure is addressed, and that is that the ERTF is very much focused on both workforce and businesses. And that one of the key issues that we were working on early on was to help connect workers, displaced workers in particular, with the benefits programs to the greatest degree that we could, given the collapse of the system that was going on with applying for unemployment, which is still in a huge backlog. We raise these issues only because we are hearing from businesses, more than one, and admittedly it is anecdotal because everything that we are dealing with right now in many ways is anecdotal in terms of the information that we have, addressing Mr. Clouda's point. We are working hard to try and make sure that we are protecting and supporting workforce just as much as we are trying to help and protect the businesses of our community, because they are both symbiotically vital to each other. And we want to make sure that there are still jobs available for the workforce, which is why you will hear us speak to these issues related to business. The workforce side of things, we have basically limited options in supporting them in regards to the current programmatic things that are available to them. The unemployment benefits are the most critical one, and the ones that we are trying to help them understand how to apply for and how to get involved in those benefits. And the benefits are generous. Yes, they are, comparatively speaking, to the wage that these workers were making. And that is a longer conversation that we will be more than happy to participate in terms of how we rebuild a more resilient economy that helps to provide workforce with even greater opportunities in the future.
Thank you. Sorry, Ms. Zolotal?
Yeah, I think my question got lost. So I guess so I should just wait for the subgroup in terms of any policy recommendations on equitability. I mean, maybe that was the answer to my question, and I just and then we moved on from there.
I forgive me. Yes, I don't have anything that's officially a recommendation from the ERTF at this point in time, but it is a clearly recognized issue and challenge that we are trying to address quickly.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
If I can weigh in really quickly, Mr. Chair, I know that we're running out of time. Lori Wolf from the Foraker Group and Kirk Rose from the Anchorage Community Land Trust and a few others put together some best practices on how to create a more equitable grant, loan, or other business nonprofit support program. They've got a really good white paper out there that they presented to AML. I would definitely, if you're interested, recommend checking that out. And additionally, I just wanted to validate exactly what you're saying. On a national level, there is evidence to show that people of color, disadvantaged folks, rural, all are getting kind of less of the funding than their urban counterparts. And so it is a big concern. Digital divide is also a factor. A lot of these programs are online only, and that causes a real problem in terms of either getting the word out to those folks, but also for the application period. I think a lot of work needs to be done. I know that Kirk's on the subcommittee that the ERTF created, and that's definitely top of mind for him. In terms of Nolan's comment, the only thing I would say is he's absolutely right. There isn't a lot of hard data out there. It's a little hard to get data on something like this, but I will say that my organization has heard from many businesses who have said this has happened to them. The National Society of HR Managers has put out guidance on this because they heard back from a number of their members, and several other organizations that represent businesses or HR groups have indicated that they are hearing the same thing, that there is enough of a pushback from people to go back to these positions that it is a problem. My larger concern there is less about trying to force people back into jobs that they don't necessarily feel comfortable going back to. It's more about there is going to be a finite amount of money available for unemployment programs. And if there are jobs available for the people that can take them back, I think that there is a case to be made that as long as it's a safe environment that complies with whatever criteria the city or the state has, we need to preserve as much of that unemployment insurance for the people that aren't going to have that option, because there are businesses and even entire industries that are just going to have a hell of a time recovering from this, and those people need the support of this social network, this social support system. So my concern would be just burning through those resources as fast as we are now.
Okay, thank you. So I am committed to keeping us on track. So I'm going to let 2 more minutes of questions and answers. I'm going to ask for very brief questions and very brief answers. So Mr. Constant.
Thank you. Bill, you used the word research. That can be a bit hieroglyphic, meaning a ton of things to somebody, but maybe something else to somebody else. Can you please define for us briefly what you mean by research? Because that might be something we need to start sooner than later. Thank you.
Sure. We need to understand what the impacts have been to the business sector in discerns of which businesses have declined, why, and what their odds are of recovering and to what degree. We need to understand the workforce that has been displaced in terms of the skill sets that they offer and what they can be trained up for quickly in other business sectors. Training that can be provided in weeks or months as opposed to years. Then finally, as a follow-on, the longer term training for that workforce, because, and then how do we pay for it all? And so, what is it going to take?
Just to refine that question very slightly, if we were to appropriate funding for research, to whom? How would that, what are we talking about here?
Well, we are working with the city administration to apply for an EDA grant to do this kind of baseline research. And
how much would you think that would be?
Sorry?
Put a number, like rough, shoot a target.
This is a working draft number. Please don't hold us to it 100% yet. We're still under discussions, 750,000 is the current number.
Thank you.
And it's focused on, again, and it's doing analysis that's going to be pretty in depth.
Thank you. And with that, I want to apologize to Ms. Allard and Mr. Weddleton. We'll get to your questions if we have time, but I want to respect the time of the folks who have come to present to us. So I'm going to move us on to speaking with the Budget Advisory Commission, the chair and vice chair, Nolan Cauda and Alyssa Rodriguez. I'll turn it over to you two.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, I'm Nolan Cauda, and I direct the Center for Economic Development, as well as serving as chair of the Budget Advisory Commission. And so I'm speaking to you with wearing two hats today. Because I'm active on both of these fronts when it comes to COVID and the economic recovery. So I do want to follow on with that, because I think we had that was a pretty energetic discussion, and so I'd like to also add some comments about some of the big picture trends and what's going on with the state economy as well. And I think to complement what Mr. Bittner and Mr. Pop just presented. I think that we have to think about where we are economically right now in terms of kind of two crises that are sort of layered on top of each other, and whether they're a crisis or ongoing kind of weakness in our economy is left up to definition. But we had been in a pretty serious recession, from 2015 to 2018 at the state level. We lost almost 13,000 jobs in that time span. During that period, the U.S. unemployment rate overall was at record lows, and Alaska typically had the highest unemployment rate in the country. And so we emerged from that very weakly, very gradually in 2019, and Anchorage actually fared a bit worse than the state as a whole. Anchorage was a bit slower in recovering than the state as a whole was. So we were on track to get back to 2015 employment levels, over 7 or 8 years. So we were on a very, very slow, weak recovery, and this is all what the stage was set for when COVID-19 hit and sort of took a sledgehammer to all of our fine-tuned little analysis and forecasts of what was to come. We saw in March and April, 80,000 new unemployment claims filed. An astounding number. If that doesn't make you queasy, then you have a stronger stomach than I do. We know that probably some of that unemployment is easing up now. The official unemployment rate, I think what Mr. Pop mentioned, there are always caveats and weaknesses to unemployment rates. It's not a perfect measure, but we know that it's dramatically higher than what it was before. The critical issue for us to think about is how many of the people who lost their jobs, how many of those separations are permanent, how many of them are temporary, how many of them are at businesses that are going to go under permanently, and we don't know the answer to that. We know that our economy is probably in something like a coma, I think is probably the way to think about it. We've had to put our economy into sort of a stasis and give it and administer life support so that it can survive when COVID lets up, when the threat of COVID is diminished. And so getting us through this period is really critical. And business failure in this kind of time period, it poses a really dramatic issue as far as what's the capacity of businesses to rehire workers again or to create new jobs. A failed business simply can't do that. And a new business that takes its place is a long ways off usually. So I think that's really a critical issue when it comes to thinking about what kind of help businesses need. There have been some interesting strides in getting real time up to date data as a result of COVID, and so there's a pulse survey that the U.S. Census Bureau does. And that kind of gives up to date results at each state level as to how businesses are doing. Alaska businesses, about 52% of Alaska businesses report a strong negative impact, and that's a little bit more than the national average. 70% of businesses have reported decreased revenues. And when it comes to how much cash on hand, and there was a question earlier about what are some of the critical indicators of whether a business is going to survive or not. And I think that cash on hand is probably one of the more important ones. In terms of how many months of cash you have on your books. And most businesses, it's very uncommon for businesses to have more than about 2 months worth. A typical business might have about $10,000 in monthly expenses, if as a rough average figure, and most businesses don't have a lot more than 1 or 2 months worth. And so it goes to show that the risk of business failure gets to be really high. And even when businesses have received some aid through PPP or through one of the other programs, that doesn't necessarily get them out of the woods yet. So we're in a pretty serious situation, and this is only the COVID part of it. The underlying weakness that we have in our state economy tied to oil and gas is a whole different issue, and the state budget issues that go along with that. So I think that it's definitely we're really not out of it yet. Also worth thinking about is that even when the economy is reopened, as the governor has stated starting today, at the statewide level at least, that doesn't mean that everything resumes normalcy. That there's still pretty strong public health advice that people should avoid crowds, that you should wear masks, that you should avoid busy public spaces, and also that households are constrained because so many people have lost their jobs and aren't certain about what's to come, and so there's definitely a freezing of a lot of economic activity. So with all of that said, I think the Budget Advisory Commission has been we actually took a break for April. We had to cancel our meeting, and we did resume again in May. And one of the key items that's been asked of us is how to spend, or how to make some recommendations on the CARES funding that the municipality is receiving, the $125 million. And that's something that our group is going to be working on. And I think that Mr. Bittner, Mr. Pop made some helpful comments about what are good uses of that funding. I think that ongoing support for businesses beyond what the pilot program was, which I think was a very good move to have that pilot program. We shouldn't assume that that there isn't going to be an ongoing need for more relief, I think, for businesses. I think that's certainly one. There also was a pretty lively discussion, I think, about some of the factors that might prevent people from going back to work if they're unemployed. And I think that childcare and issues like that factor in pretty heavily. And what sort of childcare options might be made available, or what sort of childcare relief is certainly another thing too, along with ideas like rental assistance. I have seen that places like the city and borough of Juneau is looking at ways to help businesses cover rental costs. And just because they're facing a lot of seasonal businesses that that may or may not have much of an employment headcount over the summer season when they normally would, but they're certainly going to have that ongoing predictable fixed cost in terms of their rent and their utilities. And so assistance with that is something that they're looking at pretty seriously as a path forward. All of this stuff warrants a lot more discussion still to come. But I think that these are some of the kinds of things that at least that I'm thinking about right now. With that, I'm going to let Alyssa, as vice chair for BAC and also somebody who's active in COVID recovery efforts on a number of fronts, go ahead, and then we can probably address questions after that.
Thanks, Nolan, and thank you to the chair. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk. I would like to echo most of what Nolan said. I do really want to, I guess one of the things that's maybe most concerning to me is the fact that, yeah, we're not just going to have this one initial shock to the system. There's multiple things happening at once. And then on top of that, we have, basically a lack of a tourism season, and just recognizing that we cannot in Alaska spend enough money, even if we were all to really go out there and try and buy as much local as we could and really put our full effort into it, we cannot make up for that missing tourism season. There simply aren't enough of us. And especially considering, like we've talked about before on this call, how many people remain unemployed. So I think looking at those long-term ways in which we can help businesses to get through, as Mr. Pop was saying, get through the summer and then get through the winter and things like that. This is going to be a very long, challenging period. As Nolan said, I am active in a handful of different recovery efforts. And one of the things that I've been working on as the director of the Manufacturing Extension Partnership is making sure that people have PPE, they can connect to sources of PPE. And while there's a lot that is really, there's a lot to get depressed about with this whole situation, I think the way in which numerous businesses, not just manufacturers, but restaurants and others, have really pivoted and become entirely different businesses in order to keep working when they were unable to work maybe as a restaurant. They switched and became manufacturers, and the way in which all of these businesses have pivoted to make PPE in Alaska and make sure that Alaskans are safe and can be as healthy as possible and have what they need. I think that's been a really bright spot in terms of a way that a subsection of the economy could keep working when everything else was shut down, and a way in which some people have been able to pivot and keep their businesses open, keep money coming in and things like that. So that's been kind of a bright spot. There's still a huge need for PPE in terms of equity. There's a need to make sure that everyone has access to it. And so something that we have not been involved in, but I know that there are lots of efforts surrounding, making sure, Jasmine's on the call, Jasmine Smith has been heavily involved in making sure that businesses that can't afford to get PPE are able to still get PPE. And I think that's really important when we're talking about protecting people in the face of reopening the economy. So yeah, I'd be happy to take questions about anything on the PPE front as well. But yeah, I think that this is something that we need to be thinking about. How can we use these funds to really assist and empower people, enable businesses to extend for a really long time? That's one of my biggest concerns. So thank you again. And I guess we'll take some questions if we have any time, Chair.
Thank you both. Yeah, we do have some time. I'm actually going to go back and see if I can catch up to Ms. Allard, Mr. Weddleton, get those questions in, and then if folks have additional questions, please put yourself in the queue. So I'm going to go to Ms. Allard.
That's okay. Thanks, Chair. I'll skip right now. Thank you, though.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Weddleton?
Oh, thanks. I just I guess this is part of the whole broad conversation we're having, but a lot of what we're discussing, it's supports for business, but one of the key ones that we've discussed throughout is this PPP loans, which is Paycheck Protection Loan. And those, it's really those, while they're given to businesses, are really about the employees. I mean, payroll is a huge part of most businesses, but at the most, those loans will cover 25% of utilities and rent, and nothing for all the other expenses that a business has. So really the focus is keep those employees working, even if you don't really need them. Demand is down substantially for most businesses for the whole variety of reasons, from low price of oil to the COVID crisis. So these aren't, I think it'd be wrong to say these are, subsidies for business. They are to some extent, but a large amount of the focus has been for employees to keep them paid. And then on the unemployment insurance, the impact, if anyone making less than $25 an hour makes more on unemployment. So the look that, I just want to walk away thinking that, it's only minimum wage people are making this great bonanza and they should make more. $25 an hour is pretty decent pay. And if that's what you were making and you got fired and you went on unemployment, with the federal $600 dropped on top of each week, if you're making below $25 an hour, you're making more money on unemployment. So anyway, I just want to make those points. Thanks.
Yes, and Mr. Chair, if I could jump in and address that, the PPP is really flattening the curve on unemployment is the way to think about it. And I think it's not wrong to say that it is more about, in a lot of ways, more about the workers than about the business. PPP is largely paying the business to keep their expenses high with regard to payroll expenses, so that people will stay in their jobs, right? And that's the logic of it. That means that I actually believe the PPP has done tremendous good and provided a lot of relief. But the PPP doesn't always help the business address an underlying financial challenges beyond that personnel headcount. And a concern that I've had is that a lot of the businesses in the most affected industries, restaurants or travel related or et cetera, they have they already had to cut their headcount and they might still go under, right? And so I think that that you have to think about those kinds of concerns too. If the business goes under, it can't ever hire someone again, right? So the role of businesses as job creators, that's one of the things that we care so much about. There's still that issue to think about, even if you're not paying the business to keep workers employed now. If you're letting forms of aid help them continue to exist so that they might hire in the future, that's also a valuable use. And so I think it's something to consider, in crafting other kinds of aid programs, like the state CARES funds and like work that the Muni might do with some of those CARES funds as well.
Thank you. Mr. Constant?
Yeah, thanks. This is just kind of in response to Mr. Weddleton's comments, which I understand, but if you assume PPP funds made it to a breadth of Alaskans, then there's some merit to that argument that they are supporting employees but not businesses per se. But I believe we will find, when the numbers are all done, that most businesses did not in fact qualify for PPP loans, and particularly businesses that are supporting or helping people in the neighborhoods that I represent, and that some people have already spoken about, people who tend to be left out of government programs, loans, benefits systematically, and have been for a century or more. So I think there is some credence to what you said, but I think we have to see the big picture to understand how little value the PPP is. It's great for those who can get it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I'm not seeing anyone else in the queue. So thank you so much, Nolan and Alyssa, for joining us today. It's been a great discussion. So I'm going to turn it over to our last segment of the day, and that is an update on the Small Business Nonprofit Relief Grant. For that, we have Chris Schutte, Jason Bockenstad, and Jeff Tickle, and Gabe Lehman. I'll go ahead, turn it over to, I think, Chris and Jason are going to get us started.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm going to be sharing my screen, so bear with me momentarily while I break the internet. Okay. And can you see my screen, everybody?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. And thank you for this opportunity. As you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, I am joined virtually today by Chief of Staff Jason Bockenstad, as well as Gabe Lehman with Cook Inlet, the Cook Inlet Lending Center and Cook Inlet Housing. He's the General Counsel for Cook Inlet Housing. We're going to just briefly go through the Stabilization Fund for Small Businesses and Nonprofits, talk about the program, and talk about some of the initial results, and then provide some high-level feedback from Cook Inlet Lending Center's perspective, the not-for-profit provider who's been handling the applications and review. So to set the stage, you've heard it for the past 2 hours. There is a need in the small business community for financial support for businesses and nonprofits that were impacted by COVID-19 in the municipality of Anchorage. There's been a plethora of federal stimulus measures available, but not everyone has either been able to take advantage of, received federal stimulus, or as Assemblymember Constant mentioned, typically is not aware and does not pursue some of these federal opportunities. It does require a degree of sophistication and patience that many small business owners may not have. And so we wanted to create a program that meets a need and fills a gap. We proposed to you a $1 million program. Rather than a loan program. We recognized very early on from feedback we got from Lori Wolf at the 4-Acre Group, from the Economic Resiliency Task Force, from Anchorage Community Land Trust, and everyone else, loans don't work for small businesses at this time. If we're going to put money out into the community, it should come in the form of grants. And so the program, as we developed it, opened up basically 2 tiers of grant opportunity. One tier of $5,000 grants for eligible sole proprietors, and then $10,000 grants for qualifying small businesses and nonprofits. And the grants are flexible in what they can be used for. So unlike some of the federal programs that you heard about earlier, the municipal grant program is available for spending on a wider variety of small business expenses. The criteria for this program is relatively short and sweet. We are targeting the smaller businesses in our community that make the fabric of the community so unique. We were targeting businesses that have a less than $1 million in annual gross revenues for 2019, that do not employ more than 7 full or part-time individuals at any one time in 2019, have a location in the municipality of Anchorage, and have not received or have not applied for federal aid already. One important nuance to that last criterion is that if an applicant applied for federal aid but was denied or did not get any, they would be eligible for this program. But in order to ensure that we got funds to those who did not already have funds in pocket or have the ability to receive those funds at a later date, we did target this particular pilot program to individuals who did not. We've set very few limitations on the program, and those are on the right side of your screen. We did not allow franchises to apply, as well as a few of the other age-restricted types of business here in town. And then for sole proprietors, we did require that they make the majority of their annual gross income from their sole proprietorship in order to help avoid instances of sole proprietorships that have, for example, have a day job and run a sole proprietorship on the side. Selection, this is an open and rolling application process. It closes tonight, but it's been open for 2 weeks. And it is not first come, first served, because we heard a lot of horror stories about past experiences with the federal programs and individuals that were having a hard time getting in applications quickly. So we set an application window of time so that people would have plenty of time to submit. And then we will go through those applications and utilize a random number generator to randomly select the awardees from those qualified applicants. The application process is pretty straightforward and simple and is self-certifying. However, once we close the application period and run the random number generator to select awardees, that's when we will require some additional documentation to verify the applications. Here's an overview of all of the applicants to the program that Cook Inlet Lending Center has seen, at least as of yesterday. 655 applications processed, eligible applications of 315, and there's any number of reasons why applications are deemed eligible or ineligible, and Gabe can cover that at the end here. But this is just a snapshot of some of the, I guess you could say, demographic information about the types of applicants that we've received thus far. I was a little bit surprised that we've seen the number of age-restricted businesses applying for the program, despite the fact that we advertised that they can't, but that's okay. Of the applicants that we have seen thus far, both eligible and ineligible, this is a probably hard to read on your tiny screens pie chart showing the breakdown of the business types. We've seen a lot of sole proprietors apply, which is exciting. And then there's been a number of nonprofit organizations that have also applied, which is very exciting to us as well. As I mentioned, the program closes today. There will be a period of finalizing every application that came in to complete the initial due diligence, and then we will move on to the selection next week with the goal of selecting, notifying, verifying awardees in the week after, so that we can get money on the street as soon as possible in June. And with that, I'll let Gabe and or Jason pick up with their thoughts.
Yeah, hi everyone, this is Gabe Lehman. Jason, I'm more than happy to defer to you if you'd like to lead, but otherwise I'm prepared to jump in as well.
Go ahead.
All right, well, thank you, everyone. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the Assembly. I'm Gabe Lehman. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Cook Inlet Housing. I provide leadership support to our nonprofit community lending affiliate, and that is Cook Inlet Lending Center. So first, let me just briefly extend my appreciation to Mayor Berkowitz, Mr. Schutte, Mr. Bockenstedt, and so many others in the mayor's office who really catalyzed this opportunity. It truly has been a privilege for Cook Inlet Lending Center to be engaged as the program's administrator. Before addressing whatever questions you folks may have, I definitely want to reiterate that this program, was a pilot. It was intended to provide us with data and experience that would shape future support for small businesses. And really what I'd like to do is take a minute to try to provide some of that higher level feedback. What are some of the future opportunities that the municipality should have on its radar? First and foremost, I think it's important to note that there's absolutely an opportunity to expand eligibility. Eligibility for the pilot was really structured keeping in mind that we wanted to target resources to businesses that are so often left out of these types of programs and economic recovery efforts. And that includes businesses that are operated by immigrants and people of color, but there were also eligibility limitations that could be broadened. And the primary driver behind having some of those eligibility limitations was, really about the fact that we had a very limited pool of resources that we knew would be oversubscribed. And we saw very little reason to further demoralize too many struggling businesses that would not qualify or be selected. So some of those criteria: number of employees, we limited it to 7 or fewer. Franchises were not eligible to apply. We did not accept brand new businesses that started up in early 2020, for example, because it would be extremely difficult to try to verify all of the information that they provided as being objectively accurate. We did not accept multiple applications from majority owners of multiple businesses. So if you had an individual who ran 3, 4, 5 businesses and owned a majority stake in each of those separate businesses, they have to select one of those businesses for which to apply for funding. And there is an issue when it comes to excluding from eligibility those applicants who applied for but had not been selected to receive federal relief. Again, we were really trying to target those who were left out, but unfortunately, many of those who do apply and had a pending application will ultimately not be selected. So there is that opportunity to expand eligibility. There's also an opportunity to take a hard look at the duration and quantity of the grant support that is provided. As you know,
and I'm sorry to interrupt, but if
Please.
we can wrap up, if you have like another minute or so, I do have a couple of questions before we end here at 2 o'clock.
Sure. So I think there's an opportunity to provide additional support in terms of making grants rather than a one-time infusion of $5,000 to $10,000. That'll carry businesses for a very brief amount of time, and it is not going to solve the underlying economic issues those businesses face. Most importantly, we're seeing best practices emerge nationally in the field of business support and stabilization. More successful communities are tackling these challenges in 3 phases. First, they're looking at immediate grants that allow businesses to survive for several months. They follow that with a 0% interest, sometimes forgivable loan product that then keeps the business intact for about 3 to 6 months. Very bluntly, I think the period has to be longer in Alaska because of the dramatic impacts of our lost tourism season, combined with the effects of the oil crash. Finally, there's this 3rd phase where businesses are connected with below market rate interest loans funded by more patient multi-year capital that allow businesses to stabilize and transition over a period of time to a new, more sustainable normal. Typically, that type of funding is deployed through a nonprofit community development financial institution. Right now, our community has some low interest loan funds for this phase 3. And obviously, we've piloted some of those immediate phase 1 grants, but there is a need to expand phase 1 grants, to have additional grant funds available. And there is a very significant need to find resources and a mechanism to deploy 0% interest loans under that phase 2 before proceeding to a phase 3 with low interest rate loans. Last thing that I will say very briefly, Mr. Chair, is that it is very critical to continue an emphasis on providing resources to nonprofits. The focus here has been on businesses, but nonprofits are critical to our economy, and we're seeing some real benefits for extending this program to them. One really good example is Cook Inlet Lending Center itself is a 501c3 nonprofit. It is not being compensated for administering this program. We're not receiving any administrative fee or overhead. We believe it's just critical to preserve and protect small businesses and nonprofits in our community. So we redirected about half of our organization's capacity. We designed and launched the program in about a week. It took a lot of our organization's resources, and we are now trying to find ways to make up for that. And it's a really good example of how nonprofits throughout our community are stepping up to try to fill gaps and deliver in what many other communities are considered essential public services. Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity, Mr. Chair. Happy to address any questions you have.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lehman. We have had really great, robust discussion throughout all of these 3 hours today. I'm going to go ahead and take 2 questions, and then apologies that we really don't have time for more than that. I will say, I am sure, just speaking on behalf of all of the presenters, that they are more than happy to answer any of your questions offline. So if you want their contact information, please reach out to me. I'll go ahead and start with Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Dunbar?
Sorry, I'm on my phone. So you mentioned that, Gabe, this is for Mr. Schutte as well, that this was intended in part to provide equitable relief to people of color and immigrant communities. And I'm wondering, are you gathering demographic data about who is applying and who is receiving, or once we put these out, who is receiving these grants?
The short answer to that, Assemblymember Dunbar, is no. We are not asking for racial identification information. Our goal here was to keep the application process as simple as possible. What we can tell you is that we've coordinated very closely with organizations like the Anchorage Community Land Trust to try to get the word out to minority communities and to immigrant communities. I do think that there will be an expanded opportunity in future funding rounds to both target and track that information.
Thank you. I'll just say that for future funding rounds, that'll be a prerequisite for me. If we're not measuring that and capturing that data, I'm not going to support an expansion of the program. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Zolotel?
Mr. Dunbar somewhat hit on what I was going to ask, and that was what specific outreach went to reach small businesses owned by people of color or that are considered disadvantaged businesses to apply for this first round.
Yeah, thank you, Assemblymember Zolotel. What I will tell you is that the mayor's office handled outreach, and there was broad outreach to a lot of organizations that network in minority communities. What's really notable about this is that we actually have this application actually translated into, I believe it was half a dozen or more different languages to ensure that it was accessible to individuals who do not speak English as a first language. And hopefully that helped facilitate an understanding of the program to business owners who don't speak English as a first language. But I don't know if Chris or Jason is able to talk to some of the outreach that the mayor's office did.
Thank you, Gabe. Yes, through the chair, Assemblymember Zolotel and Dunbar, I did want to mention that while the application does not require submission of demographic information, it is our intention that there will be demographic survey information requested. It won't be a mandatory submission, but we have very much the same interest that was in your question, Assemblymember Dunbar, in tracking not only the demographic location but the geographic location of the program. To your question, Assemblymember Zolotel, there has been outreach among a lot of the trade groups, organizations, neighborhood groups, et cetera, that some of which Mr. Lehman enumerated, others of which include the Anchorage Chamber of Commerce, the Downtown Partnership, the Anchorage Economic Development Corporation, the ERTF and its member groups, I believe that even individual advocates such as Jasmine Smith have been heavily promoting this amongst their peers and their networks as well. We had to move quickly though, and so a more robust communication and outreach effort for any sort of future tranches or future programs would absolutely be something that gets included. We learned a lot from this experience, and we look forward to learning even more as it wraps up. And this is certainly one of the areas in which we learned a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and read a comment from Mr. Constant, and then I'm going to wrap this up. So from Mr. Constant, quote, "We should make it a requirement of receipt of funds." And then just to wrap up, want to really thank everyone for your participation, from all of the businesses that we started this meeting with, to the lending institutions, Wells Fargo, Alaska USA, Northern Bank. A big thank you to AEDC and SBDC for your contributions, as well as the chair and vice chair of the Budget Advisory Commission. And then last, of course, the Chris Schutte, Jason Bockenstadt, and Gabe Lehman. Thank you all for your contributions. This has been an incredible discussion, and will, I assume, and I'm sure will spark a lot more discussion and ideas. Thanks, everyone. I will see you at 2:30 for our next meeting.